Why do 70% of critical thinkers ditch Disney Plus? Because they found something better. In today's economy, every dollar counts. So what's worth subscribing to? Let's compare, and no sound bites allowed. With Disney Plus, you're shelling out $140 a year for virtue signaling shows targeting mythical modern audiences. Plus, a theater visit could cost you $40 or more. Ouch. Now imagine a platform where fresh perspectives, insightful interviews, and engaging discussions are at your fingertips. That's no sound bites allowed. And the best part? It's free with an option to support only if you choose. While Disney Plus ticks off virtue signal checkboxes, no sound bites allowed offers real talk and sharp analysis. Perfect for those who crave depth and clarity. Why break the bank for entertainment? Subscribe to No Sound Bites Allowed and enjoy meaningful content without the hefty price tag.
All right, and hello everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is No Sound Bites Allowed, and I am your host. That's right, it's Michael Voss, the political dragon, here in our office in the Bronx, New York. It is 8:30, and tonight is October 1st. We're about to be seeing the first and only vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, Governor Tim Walz. And this is going to be hosted by CBS News, who will not be fact-checking throughout the debate. Obviously, it seems that this is their answer to be able to fortify the election. Without taking all the grief that CNN and ABC had received, they're going to avoid any fact-checking whatsoever and leave it on the candidates, which means it's going to be mudslinging, it's going to be name-calling, back and forth, and they're just going to let it happen, and they'll just assume you'll know what's the truth. You'll know all the facts that you need to know without them having to help the audience on anything that might be unfamiliar with you, like any facts and figures, any data from the United States government or other governments and business data. They figure you just know all that. It's kind of insulting, actually. Hello, Tony. Tony is with us. Have you heard that the East Coast shipping ports are striking? Yes, I did. In fact, I was talking with Kit Cabello of Hardlens Media last night, and when I was on with Larry Sharp, and we were talking about a lot of things last night, in particular the impact of RFK on the Trump campaign and how it might affect the administration and the nation afterwards. And during the conversation, Kit had brought up that there was a large expectation of a strike amongst the Teamsters because by 2-1, they seem to be favoring Donald Trump and not Kamala Harris, which is a big deal amongst the Democrats. It's like saying that they're going to get less than 70% of black people voting Democrat. When Democrats hear that, or they hear that the unions, in particular the Teamsters, aren't voting for them, they lose their minds because it means that they have lost a lot of power and they're probably going to lose the election. And it may even mean that they're going to lose Congress, either the House and or the Senate. So this is a very negative indicator for them, and that puts them into panic mode, which actually adds to the stress on Governor Tim Walz to be able to really perform well. They are counting on Tim Walz to basically shore up the weak performances by Kamala Harris and to draw back in the traditional Democrats, the unions, black voters, minority voters, to bring them back in to the fold so that they can have a better competition with Donald Trump. I don't think it's going to happen. I absolutely do not think that's going to happen. Tony says it's about money and the cost of inflation. They want a $6 an hour pay raise. Tony, that doesn't seem realistic to me. Look, it's not. I'm not saying that they don't deserve the money. They work hard, absolutely. But where's that money coming from? That $6 an hour raise, which is a very large raise, is going to destroy poor people. And this is something that we've seen with the minimum wage, when we see in California, the $20 an hour minimum wage, the $15 an hour minimum wage in New York State, in Washington State. The problem is that increase in cost is passed on to everyone. And the poor people become more poor, even though inflation is going to continue, because the thing that's driving inflation right now, the three main things that are driving inflation in America are the cost of energy, the food crisis, 30% less food in the world today than in 2019, and the last thing is printing money. It's the United States government spending money in about $2 trillion per year that we don't have. And every time they keep printing that money, that makes poor people more poor, because your dollar is worth less and less. We saw this in probably a more extreme version of this back in the 1980s throughout all of Central and South America. We called them banana republics. It's very much like the Weimar Republic. People were printing money, but the money was worthless as they printed it. And so everything costs more and more. We're kind of in that cycle. So, yeah, and like you mentioned, Tony, just look at McDonald's. What did McDonald's do? Same thing we always see. They raised the price, they fired employees, they added in more automation, and poor people became more poor. More importantly, everyone's paying for the higher price of McDonald's. I mean, it's ridiculous how much McDonald's and fast food cost these days. You have less people working there. So yes, the people who got to keep their jobs, yeah, they're making $15 an hour. There's less of them, and the prices are higher, so no one can really afford. I mean, I remember when I was in high school, you could go and afford, a Big Mac and large fries and a Coke. It cost you like what, $2.50? $2.50, $3 max. Now you try and get that same thing, what I just described, it's going to cost you at least $15. That's not affordable. That's not cheap. That's expensive, too expensive, and that's the net result. So I don't think they're going to get $6 an hour. I would hope they don't. I want them to have a raise, sure, but we can't gap the price that much without having a very negative impact on the average person. So I thank you, Tony, for bringing up that question. By the way, folks, just to let you know, we're going right now. I'm more than happy to take phone calls at 929-715-8569. And I'll take calls up until we actually see the debate start. And I'll be more than happy to talk to everyone. You can reach me on YouTube, on Facebook, on Rumble. You can super chat me both on Rumble and on YouTube right up until it starts. What is that? Tony says, yeah, thumbs up, $3. And yeah, that was back in the 80s. $3, you can walk out with all the food you wanted. So I just wanted everyone to know you can still reach us. I am paying attention to the comments, as you can see. I'm talking to Tony, who happens to be on Facebook at this moment. I know I wasn't sure that I was going to do this today. And actually, I was going to start at 8 o'clock. But my dog was having a bit of a tantrum. And so he wanted to go at 8 o'clock. He decided he needed to go out. So I walked him, and that's why we started at 8:30 instead. But I don't think it's going to make a difference because I don't see this being the big event. And looking at the news media, they haven't been touting this as a big event. It's not like Trump versus Harris. It's not like Trump versus Biden. This is much more low key. And I think part of that is because they have been busy trying to lower the expectations for Governor Tim Walz. We've been hearing about Tim Walz has a nervous tic where he grabs his crotch when he gets nervous. I've never heard of that before. And, he's a governor. He's been in elected office before. Is this something that he's always done? Is this something that's known amongst his constituents? Or are people just like, oh yeah, we're used to him just grabbing his crotch in Minnesota. We just don't care. Or is that a new tick that he's taken on since he's been put into the national spotlight and people have gotten to know so much about the things that he hoped no one would ever know, like his stolen valor, which I do believe is going to come up. And the CBS moderators, I absolutely have no belief that they're going to fairly moderate this. I think they're going to be just like ABC or like MSNBC or CNN, that there is an absolute bias and they're going to try and fortify the 2024 election for Democrats. They're going to try and help Tim Walz as best they can, which is why they're not fact checking. So no, when Tim Walz lies, they're not going to get called out for not fact checking him live. And they're willing to take the slings and arrows for not fact checking JD Vance live, because they'll be able to help out Tim Walz without people saying there's an obvious bias there. That's why I think they did this. They think this is going to help the Democrats more than it hurts their reputation. But I think CBS blew up their reputation for nothing. It was a waste, in my opinion. You guys may think I'm wrong, but that's what I'm thinking about that at this moment. And I do think J.D. Vance is absolutely going to bring up the stolen valor, because it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. Governor Tim Walz actively told people that he was a combat veteran, which is factually a lie. He went around telling people that he retired with a higher rank than he had. That is a lie. He actually was lying about what he did in the service. That is stolen valor. It's not a mistake. That was purposive, and he did that to boost his public persona and the way that he would impress people. And that's why stolen valor is so bad, because you're taking on respect that you haven't earned, and that's very upsetting. As someone who served in the Marines, my father served in the Marines. I've had family members who served in the Army. And you know what? No, I wasn't in combat. I have never said I was in combat. I wasn't. My father was in Vietnam. He got 100% disability. He suffered from Agent Orange and several other things. He deserves all the credit. One of the reasons why I would never presume to tell someone I was a combat veteran. No, I was not a combat veteran. Absolutely not. I would never try and promote myself like the heroes who have served in combat. And everybody who served in combat, I think, is a hero. And I think we need to do so much more for them. The VA sucks, and we need to redo that. But there's a reason. And I saw my father struggle. I saw what happened to him after he came back from Vietnam, both mentally with PTSD, as well as the physical difficulties, much of it from Agent Orange. And I would never want to take away what he earned with his sweat and his blood and parts of his body. So I think that's absolutely going to come up. Steve Hill has joined us. Hello, Steve. He thanks me for the service. No, it was my pleasure. I loved serving America. I had a great time in the Marines, and I enjoy it. I know not everyone does, but I did. Steve says, Tim Walz is a disgrace to the uniform. I agree with you completely. And I think that J.D. Vance is rightly going to call him out on that, and he's going to make a point of bringing that up, and Tim Walz needs to explain, and more importantly, apologize to the American people for misrepresenting his position, his role, his combat status, and the fact that when he went, and I love how he says, yeah, but I was stationed overseas in a combat orientation. No, you were in the back. You weren't on the front lines. You were sitting in an office. You were in Italy, sitting in an office, eating spaghetti, while the troops were on the ground getting shot at. There's a big difference. You weren't in a combat zone. You didn't have a combat deployment, Tim. And anyone who served in the military knows the difference. So you may be able to run around to your Democrat friends who have never served and tell them, hey, yeah, I was in combat in Italy. No, you weren't. That just upsets me. That just upsets me. I hate stolen valor, and I don't like what Tim... And for no other reason than that, I can't stand Tim Walz. I don't need another reason besides that to dislike, and I was never going to vote for a Democrat anyway, for Kamala Harris or for Tim Walz. Never going to vote for them anyway. But now I am massively against them. I want to see Tim Walz lose as badly as possible, just because of the stolen valor. And that's my bias. I'm willing to tell you right up front. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to pretend that I don't have it. Yes, I have a personal problem. That is my personal feeling. And I know I try and stay away from feelings because feelings aren't politics and they shouldn't be. And I do try and be as objective as I can be, but I have to be honest with you that I have a serious problem with that, and it comes through. It will come through in this conversation tonight that I'm already starting. He's already, on a scale of 1 to 10, he's already at -5 with me. Okay? So, I mean, I'm just being honest about that. I hope you guys can appreciate that because I'm telling you the truth. And if there's nothing else, you will always get the truth from me. That's my bias. That's the reason for my bias, and I think it's legitimate, and in my view, it's justified. You may disagree, and that's fine. You can tell me, Mike, that's just not right. Fine, tell me why. But I'm letting you know ahead of time. Now, obviously, that's not the only thing that's going to be on discussion. We do know, and the House Oversight Committee, they have been investigating or trying to investigate Governor Tim Walz for about a month now, for about 30 days. Since August 17th, they have been looking into potential allegations of Tim Walz having a very close and perhaps inappropriate relationship with the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Now, we do know that Tim Walz has gone and been in China. He's taken 30 trips over there. He taught, he was teaching English over in China. We know that he decided to have a honeymoon with his wife in China, which is very odd. I mean, of all the places that people go to have a what do you call it? The honeymoon. People go to France. People go to Austria. They go to, waterfalls and beautiful places. There's a lot of places, mostly tropical places. They go to Fiji and the islands and Hawaii. I've never heard about people saying, I need to go to China. Let me go around the Great Wall of China. That's so romantic. I don't think so. People going, oh yeah, nothing more romantic than being stuck in a communist nation that doesn't believe in religion and oppresses its people. Yeah, that's really romantic. Let's go to Tiananmen Square because that's just so romantic. I don't get it. But yet, that's where he went for his honeymoon. I don't get it. So I understand why people would want to look at his record a little more deeply because obviously in his race for governor, people weren't. They just took his word for it. But now he's on the national stage and he gets more details. And it seems, according to the House Oversight Committee, they have found that the Department of Homeland Security, there is a memo from employees speaking to each other saying that there is something wrong. There was a problem with Tim Walz and his communications currently or recently with China. And given the fact that we have seen consistently when China has a spy in the U.S. in our politics, every time we have seen that, it has been linked to Democrats, whether it's Eric Swalwell or the late Dianne Feinstein, even right now with Andrew Cuomo and Kathy Hochul, the governors of New York, half a dozen members of the California state government, Chinese spies, every single one. For some of them having Chinese spies attached to them for decades. And so every time we find there's a Chinese spy in American politics, they're working for a Democrat every single time. We haven't seen that not with a Republican, not with a Libertarian, not with the Green Party. No other party seems to have Chinese spies enmeshed in there, but the Democrats do. And so that really makes me think there might be a problem with Tim Walz. He may, whether knowingly or not, be connected to a Chinese spy, especially since he has such a close relationship with China, that he would go and have his honeymoon there, that he's been there 30 times. Then there's the things about BLM. Tim Walz had no problem with having autonomous zones in his country. He allowed in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, there was a 1 year long, actually a year and a half, he allowed an autonomous zone, a group of people to just hijack a neighborhood in Minneapolis for over a year, to deny people the ability to work, to deny people the ability to be safe in their homes. And he let it happen. He could have got the National Guard and closed it down. Even in California, Governor Newsom finally closed down the Chaz, the Capitol Hill autonomous zone. Even in Portland, it took them a while, it took them months, but they finally closed down their autonomous zones. In Atlanta, after the 8-year-old was killed, they closed down the autonomous zone. But no, Tim Walz left it because he supports BLM. He supports Antifa. He supports the far left extremism. He believes in the idea that white people are evil because they're born and black people are victims because they're born. I don't agree with any of that. So he has a lot to answer for. And I don't know, but I hope that's all going to come up in this debate, and that he's going to answer for all of these things. And if he can, that will be impressive. But according to the latest news reports that I've been reading from the credible news organizations, Politico, Real Clear Politics, I believe The Independent had an article about this, it seems that Tim Walz thinks that he's not a good debater, which is surprising to me. You got to be governor. You had to have a debate for that. He's been in elected office. You had to have debates for that. But now he's saying, suddenly now, he's like, well, I'm not really good at debating. Then how did you become governor? I don't understand. How did you win those elected offices if you weren't good at being able to present your benefits, the benefits to the public for having you elected? Now, yes, Tony, I think Tim Walz does scream espionage and Chinese influence. I think so. I could be wrong, but that's the impression I am getting. And we have a higher risk amongst Democrats than any other political organization to have that kind of influence. At least that's what history has shown us so far. And that's just a fact. You may not like that. I know there are people who are left-leaning who watch the channel and they get, they hate watch me. I get it. But to be fair, guys, that is the truth. That is where all the evidence is. If you think I'm wrong, great. Show me a Republican that had a Chinese spy attached to them and I'll take it all back. But there isn't one. There just isn't. They're all in the Democratic Party, which is a problem, which is why I think Tim Walz has a problem. So I think that will come up as well, even as he's saying that he has problems, that he's not good at doing this. Well, if you're not good at expressing your ideas and your motivations and how you're going to benefit the people, how can you be a governor? Because you have to explain those things to the public anyway. And how do you expect to be vice president? You have to go over and talk to Iran or North Korea or China or Russia. And you're going to be talking on behalf of the United States. And it may be an adversarial role that you will be in. And you're going to have strong words with these people. You're going to have to confront them directly. And you have to be very clear and very eloquent, because if you aren't, kind of like when Kamala Harris was in South Korea both times. She insulted not only the president of South Korea each time she went there, but she embarrassed the United States government and made the relationship between South Korea and America adversarial because of her faux pas, because of what she said and what she did. So you have to be good at debating, and you have to be good at speaking to be not only a governor, but absolutely for vice president and president. So if you can't do that, which is an essential element of the job, why did you say yes? Why did Kamala Harris take you? I mean, it's now come out that he told Kamala Harris when she was picking him, I'm not good at doing debates. Then why would she pick you? If you can't do a good debate, how can you have an adversarial discussion with a foreign country? Unless she thinks, well, he'll do just as good as Kamala did, which is complete failure. I mean, look at her interactions with Central and South American countries trying to stem the flow of illegal aliens into America. It failed. It's abject failure. So maybe she thinks, well, if she failed and now she's been promoted to the nominee for the presidency, well, then Tim Walz can do the same thing. I guess that's the mentality behind it. I don't understand. Tony says, in talking about Chinese espionage in American politics, Tony says that show any Republican that has or had any acknowledged spy from any country, shadow them. And I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm sure every country has spies. They all have spy networks, and all of the spy networks, our spies are in other countries. Other countries have spies in our country. It happens. It exists. I'm not naive. I understand that. The difference, though, is we're talking about being embedded in some of the highest and most high-profile, most important offices of the land. Dianne Feinstein, which was on the Intelligence Committee in the Senate. Eric Swalwell, who was formerly on the House Committee for Intelligence. Those are important. We're talking about decades of information potentially being spread because of that interaction with those Democrats. We're talking about how all of the operations of New York State at every level, federal and state level, going through the governor's office with two different governors. Of course, both hyper-Democrats. So there is a lot there, and there is no comparison. And you're right, Tony. I can't say, it's not like there's a French spy, a German spy, even a British spy. 007 isn't in the Republican Party. I mean, it's not like we wouldn't find them. If they did, I guarantee you, every single news media organization, the 80% that are left-leaning, would have a field day pointing out how there was an infiltration. They would love to be able to say, hey, there's a Russian spy in with Donald Trump. They would love that. It would justify all of their promises of Russia and collusion. It would justify all of their hate, and there isn't one. But there is on the Democrat side. Let me see. Agent Black, hey, it's good to see that you're up and with us. I know it's 7 hours ahead for you, Agent Black, because you're over in the United Kingdom. He says, are you retreating the debate? Yes, I will be, not retweeting, but re-streaming. Yes, I'm going to be playing it. It's going to be starting in about 1 minute. So yes. And Tony, yes, I get that you're saying it's less likely. I'm agreeing with you. But we're going to see. Let's see. This should be up. This is going to be simulcast from CBS. And I'm watching it myself on, or I intend to watch it here on C-SPAN as soon as it comes up. All right, C-SPAN. Don't mess with me. Bring it up. Yes. I don't need information on it. I just need to see it. Okay, they're saying at 9 p.m. It's 9 p.m., guys. Bring it up. Now, what I'll do is, as this is streaming, when I'm going to say something, I'll take down the sound during the debate, and this way you'll be able to hear my voice, and I won't be talking over them. But then we won't be able to hear the debate as well. But, you know, I'll try and make it interesting. Come on. Where is... Bring it back. I know it's... Yes, go live. Here we go.
Democratic Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Republican Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio.
Now, this is likely the final debate of this election cycle, and voting is already underway in 20 states. CBS News polling shows this remains a race either presidential candidate.
I don't believe in the polling being accurate. I think the trend line shows that Republicans have an advantage here. I also think that it's insane that we're only getting one debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. We've only getting one debate between the vice presidential candidates. I think this is insane. This is insulting to the American people, and we should have had more debates. Absolutely, we should have more debates.
Headquarters in New York.
I don't care about CBS. I think it's insulting to the American people. Oh, here we go.
Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for joining us for tonight's CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. We want to welcome our viewers on CBS, on other networks here in the U.S. and around the world. We have a consequential night ahead, and our focus is the issues that matter to you, the voter. Let's introduce the candidates. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz and Ohio's Republican Senator J.D. Vance, tonight meeting for the first time.
I'm Margaret Brennan. In
you
order
didn't
to
show us
have
the
a
handshake?
thoughtful and civil debate, these are the rules that both campaigns have.
Cameraman needs to be fired.
Will be directed at one candidate who will have 2 minutes to respond. The other candidate will be allowed 2 minutes for rebuttal. Then each candidate will get another minute to make further points, with an additional 1 minute each at the discretion of the moderator. The primary role of the moderators is to facilitate the debate between the candidates, enforce the rules, and provide the candidates with the opportunity to fact-check claims made by each other.
CBS News reserves the right to mute the candidates' microphones to maintain decorum. We have not shared the questions or topics with the campaigns.
I doubt
the
it.
stage is set. Governor, Senator, thank you for joining us. Let's get started. Tonight, our country is facing several unfolding crises. The Middle East is on the brink of war. Americans are suffering from the catastrophic impact of Hurricane Helene.
Hamas.
And now a labor strike as 25,000 dock workers from Maine to Texas are picketing. We're going to begin tonight with the Middle East. Margaret.
Thank you, Nora.
The hostages.
Earlier today, Iran launched its largest attack yet on Israel, but that attack failed.
Yes.
Thanks to joint U.S. and Israeli defensive action.
Iron Dome.
President Biden has deployed more than 40,000 U.S. military personnel and assets to that region over the past year to try to prevent a regional war.
Year, not recently.
But the U.S. still considers it the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and it has drastically reduced the time it would take to develop a nuclear weapon. It is down now to 1 or 2 weeks' time. Governor,
Essentially, they have one.
you are the final voice in the Situation Room. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, and thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is
What about the
absolutely
Americans?
fundamental. Getting its hostages back,
What about the 34 Americans that were killed by them?
in crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies.
What about the 22 Americans that were taken as hostage?
The United States have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago.
He's pro-Hamas. He's taking he's using humanitarian aid to support Hamas. What about the Americans who were killed? How about the Americans who have been hostage and are probably dead as well? What about those Americans?
His chief of staff, John Kelly, said that he was the most flawed human being he'd ever met. And both of his secretaries of defense and his national security advisors said he should be nowhere near the White House. Now, the person closest to
not answering the question
Donald Trump said he's unfit for the highest office. That was Senator Vance. What we've seen out of Vice President Harris is we've seen steady leadership. We've seen a calmness that is able to draw on the coalitions to bring them together.
He's not answering the question.
That our allies matter. When our allies see Donald Trump turn towards Vladimir Putin, turn towards North Korea, when we start to see that type of fickleness around holding the coalitions together, we will stay committed. And as
that's why Trump started no new wars, and that's why there was more global peace under Trump than under Obama or under Biden.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, the same question. Would you support or oppose a preemptive strike by Israel on Iran? You have 2 minutes.
So, Margaret, I want to answer the question. First of all, thanks, Governor. Thanks to CBS for hosting the debate. And thanks, most importantly, to the American people who are watching this evening and caring enough about this country to pay attention to this vice presidential debate. I want to answer the question, but I want to actually give an introduction to myself a little bit because I recognize a lot of Americans don't know who either one of us are. I was raised in a working class family. My mother required food assistance for periods of her life. My grandmother.
Okay, I don't care how he grew up. That's not really important to me. But at least he told us why he's not starting off with the answer first. At least there is that.
On the GI Bill after I enlisted in the Marine Corps and served in Iraq. And so I stand here asking to be your vice president with extraordinary gratitude for this country, for the American dream that made it possible for me to live my dreams. And most importantly, I know that a lot of you are worried.
Look, I know that you're right, Tony. He is tap dancing right now, but at least he started off saying he is going to answer the question, but he wanted to get his intro in. Okay, fine, I'll give you that, but you better answer the question.
Dream is going to be attainable once again. Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence.
So he's not going to answer the question either.
Out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies and, God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well.
Well, that's true of the Houthis, and it is true of Hamas.
To fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world. Now, you asked about a preemptive strike, Margaret, and I want to answer the question. Look, It is up to Israel what they think they need to do to keep their country safe, and we should support our allies wherever they are when they're fighting the bad guys. I think that's the right approach to take with the Israel question.
Good point. He answered the question.
Governor Walz, do you care to respond to any of the allegations?
Well, look, Donald Trump was in office. We'll sometimes hear a revisionist history, but when Donald Trump was in office, it was Donald Trump who we had a coalition of nations that had boxed.
There's no revision. There were no new wars. We were on the path of more peace. The world was more stable. That is a fact.
Is closer to a nuclear weapon than they were before because of Donald Trump's fickle leadership. And when Iran shot down an American aircraft in international airspace, Donald Trump tweeted, because that's the standard diplomacy of Donald Trump. And when Iranian missiles did fall near U.S. troops and they received traumatic brain injuries, Donald Trump wrote it off as headaches.
No, he didn't.
Look, our allies understand that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever has the most flattery or where it makes sense to him. Steady leadership like you witnessed today, like you witnessed in April. Both Iranian attacks were repelled. Our coalition is strong, and we need the steady lead.
Wait a minute. So steady. What happened to the Americans? Why are the hostages still over there?
Did have a diplomatic deal with Iran to temporarily pause parts of its nuclear program, and President Trump did exit that deal. He recently said, just 5 days ago, the U.S. must now make a diplomatic deal with Iran because the consequences are impossible. Did he make a mistake? You have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, Margaret, diplomacy is not a dirty word, but I think that's something that Governor Walz just said is quite extraordinary. You yourself just said Iran is as close to a nuclear weapon today as they have ever been. And Governor Walz, you blame Donald Trump. Who has been the vice president for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is your running mate, not mine. Donald Trump consistently made the world more secure. Now, we talk about what the sequence of events that led us to where we are right now.
Did Tim Walz just grab his crotch? Did he do that?
Which I appreciate Governor Walz bringing up. But when did Iran and Hamas and their proxies attack Israel? It was during the administration of Kamala Harris. So Governor Walz can criticize Donald Trump's tweets, but effective, smart diplomacy and peace through strength is how you bring stability back to a very broken world. Donald Trump has already done it once before. Ask yourself at home, when was the last
Vance is going to stomp him.
Time that an American president didn't have a major conflict break out? The only answer is during the 4 years that Donald Trump was president.
Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. Nora?
Margaret, thank you. Let's turn now to Hurricane Helene. The storm could become one of the deadliest on record. More than 160 people are dead and hundreds more are missing. Scientists say climate change makes these hurricanes larger, stronger, and more deadly because of the historic rainfall.
No, global warming does.
Senator Vance, according to CBS News polling, 7 in 10 Americans and more than 60% of Republicans under the age of 45 favor the U.S. taking steps to try and reduce climate change. Senator, what responsibility would the Trump administration have to try and reduce the impact of climate change? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Sure. So first of all, let's start with the hurricane because it's an unbelievable, unspeakable human tragedy. I just saw today actually a photograph of 2 grandparents on a roof with a 6-year-old child, and it was the last photograph ever.
Humanizing.
And those innocent people lost their lives. And I'm sure Governor Walz joins.
That's the tactic. It's humanizing.
Those innocent people, our prayers go out to them, and we want as robust and aggressive as a federal response as we can get to save as many lives as possible, and then of course afterwards to help the people in those communities rebuild. I mean, these are communities that I love. Some of them I know very personally in Appalachia, all across the Southeast. They need their government to do their job, and I commit that when Donald Trump is president again, the government will put the citizens of this country first when they suffer from a disaster. Now, Nora, you asked about climate change. I think this is a very important issue. Look, a lot of people are justifiably worried about all these crazy weather patterns. I think it's important for us, first of all, to say Donald Trump and I support clean air, clean water. We want the environment to be cleaner and safer. But one of the things that I've noticed some of our Democratic friends talking a lot about is a concern about carbon emissions, this idea that carbon emissions drives all of the climate change. Well, let's just say that's true, just for the sake of argument, so we're not arguing about weird science. Let's just say that's true. Well, if you believe that, what would you want to do? The answer is that you'd want to reshore as much American manufacturing as possible, and you'd want to produce as much energy as possible in the United States of America because we're the cleanest economy in the entire world. What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more.
I like the way that he's putting everything that the Biden-Harris administration did on just Harris alone. But then again, you know, Biden is a part-time zombie president, so he's doing pretty good there.
Cleaner water. The best thing to do is to...
And it is a fact that the United States has reduced greenhouse gases more than any other nation in the world for the last, since 2015.
Well, we got close to an agreement because all those things are happening. Look, first of all...
We don't need an agreement. We already lead the world
with this hurricane. And my heart goes out to the folks that are down there in contact with the governors. I serve as co-chair of the Council of Governors as we work together on these emergency managements. Governors, no partisanship. They work together. So all of the governors and the emergency responders are on the ground. Those happen on the front end. The federal government comes in, makes sure they're there to that we recover. But
he's having weird pauses.
That they're staying there, staying focused. Now, look, coming back to the climate change issue, there's no doubt this thing roared onto the scene faster and stronger than anything we've seen. Senator Vance has said that there's a climate problem in the past. Donald Trump called it a hoax. and then joked that these things would make more beachfront property to be able to invest in.
That Obama bought.
Of the Harris administration now, the Biden-Harris administration, is we've seen this investment. We've seen massive investments, the biggest in global history that we've seen in the Inflation Reduction Act, has created jobs all across the country.
That's why unemployment is increasing. Okay.
Technology that we invented and making it here. 200,000 jobs across the country. The largest solar manufacturing plant in North America sits in Minnesota. But my farmers know climate change is real. They've seen 500-year droughts, 500-year floods back to back. But what they're doing is adapting, and this has allowed them to tell me, look, I harvest corn, I harvest soybean, and I harvest wind. We are producing more natural gas and more oil at any time than we ever have. We're also producing more clean energy. So the solution...
So we don't need a coalition, do we, if we're already doing it?
Climate change is real. Reducing our impact is absolutely critical, but this is not a false choice. You can do that at the same time you're creating the jobs that we're seeing all across the country. That's exactly what this administration has done. We are seeing us becoming an energy superpower for the future, not just the current. And that's what absolutely makes sense. And then we start thinking about how do we mitigate these disasters.
Thank you. Senator, I want to give you an opportunity to respond there. The governor mentioned that President Trump has called climate change a hoax. Do you agree?
Well, look, what the president has said is that if the Democrats, in particular Kamala Harris and her leadership, if they really believe that climate change is serious, what they would be doing is more manufacturing and more energy production in the United States of America, and that's not what they're doing. So clearly...
Look, the fact is the United States we reduce global emissions more than all of Europe and the United Kingdom combined, and have done so since 2015. We are the solution to climate change already. We don't need additional agreements with anyone else. The rest of the world has to catch up to us. We don't have to catch up with them. It's pretty straightforward.
Billions of dollars of American taxpayer money on solar panels that are made in China. Number one, you're going to make the economy dirtier. We should be making more of those solar panels here in the United States of America.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Tony. There is something wrong with the way that Tim Walz is speaking, because he's having abnormal pauses. Like he's in the middle of a paragraph and then there's full stop, and then he picks back up again. Something's wrong with that.
Years.
Senator.
Natural gas, we got to invest more in it. Kamala Harris has done the opposite. That's raised energy prices and also meant that we're doing
Senator,
worse by the
Senator,
climate.
your time is up. Governor, would you like to respond?
Well, look, we're producing more natural gas than we ever have. There's no moratorium on that. We're producing more oil. But the folks know, and like I said again, these are not liberal folks. These are not folks that are Green New Deal folks. These are farmers that have been drought one year, massive flooding the next year. They understand that it makes sense. Look, our number one export cannot be topsoil from erosion from these massive storms. We saw it in Minnesota this summer. And thinking about how do we respond to that, we're thinking ahead on this. And what Kamala Harris has been able to do in Minnesota, we're starting to weatherproof some of these things. The infrastructure law that was passed allows us to think about mitigation in the future. How do we make sure...
If it wasn't an infrastructure law, it was a...
protecting lakefronts and things that we're seeing more and more of. But to call it a hoax and to take the oil company executives to Mar-a-Lago, say, give me money for my campaign, and I'll let you do whatever you want.
Because Kamala Harris didn't try and ask the unions for money. Of course not.
Creating those jobs right here.
Governor, your time is up. The overwhelming consensus among scientists is that the Earth's climate is warming at an unprecedented rate. Margaret?
Thank you, Nora. We're going to turn now
there was
to
a consensus
immigration.
that the Earth was flat too, but that wasn't true.
Consistently ranks as one of the top issues for American voters. Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history, and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations,
we have about DACA.
We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens,
That was Biden, but yes. Hit the wrong
opened the floodgates. And what it's meant is that a lot of fentanyl is coming into our country. I had a mother who struggled with opioid addiction and has gotten clean. I don't want people who are struggling with addiction to be deprived of their second chance because Kamala Harris let in fentanyl into our communities at record levels. So you've got to stop the bleeding. You've got to re-implement Donald Trump's border policies, build the wall, re-implement deportations. And that gets me to your point, Margaret, about what do we actually do? So we've got 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some.
Okay, so they want to get rid of the criminals first and then try and weed it all the way down. I like the way that Vance is both pushing forward the agenda of Donald Trump, and then he goes into the answer. He is answering the questions, but he's doing his politicking up front. Then he gives the substantive answer afterwards. We're not seeing that from Tim at all.
Final point, Margaret, is you ask about family separation. Right now in this country, Margaret, we have 320,000 children that the Department of Homeland Security has effectively lost. Some of them have been sex trafficked. Some of them hopefully are at homes with their families. Some of them have been used as drug trafficking mules. The real family separation policy in this country is unfortunately Kamala Harris's wide open southern border. And I'd ask my fellow Americans to remember when she came into office, she said she was going to do this. Real leadership would be saying, you know what, I screwed up. We're going to go back to Donald Trump's border policies. I wish that she would do that. It would be good for all of us.
Governor,
strong answer.
Do you care to respond to any of those specific allegations, including that the vice president is, quote, letting in fentanyl and using kids as drug mules?
Okay, so that's how CBS is going to do their fact checking, by providing the question that he should be answering.
Opioid crisis. And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California.
No one cares about her being Attorney General. She's Vice President.
Transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions. But look, we all want to solve this. Most of us want to solve this. And that is the United States Congress. That's the Border Patrol agents. That's the Chamber of Commerce. That's most Americans out here. That's why we had the fairest and the toughest bill on
to slow down the number of illegal aliens entering into America, not to stop them, not to deport them. So let's be honest about what the bill does.
Democrats and Republicans worked on this piece of legislation. The Border Patrol said, this is what we need in here. These are the experts. And the Chamber of Commerce and the Wall Street Journal said, pass this thing. Kamala Harris helped get there. 1,500 new border agents.
To allow illegal aliens to continue to enter America. It was to slow down the number of people coming into America, not to stop them from coming into America. Read the bill.
Told them to vote against it because it gives him a campaign issue. It gives him what would Donald Trump talk about if we actually did some of these things? And they need to be done by the legislature.
We don't need to keep the border open. In fact, we have laws in place that shouldn't. So California and New York are in violation of, by being sanctuary states, they're in violation of federal law, which he doesn't want to mention.
We'll pay for it. Less than 2% of that wall got built, and Mexico didn't pay a dime. But here we are again, 9 years after he...
But the wall was effective.
Dehumanizing people and telling them what he was going to do. As far as the deportation plan...
Dehumanizing? Really? Really?
Workable to be laughable. So that's where we're at. Pass the bill, she'll sign it.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, the question was, will you separate parents from their children, even if their kids are U.S. citizens? You have 1 minute.
Margaret, my point is that we already have massive child separations thanks to Kamala Harris's open border. And I didn't accuse Kamala Harris of inviting drug mules. I said that she enabled the Mexican drug cartels to operate freely in this country. And we know that they use children as drug mules. And it is a disgrace. And it has to stop.
You can't argue that.
Look, I think what Tim said just doesn't pass the smell test. For 3 years, Kamala Harris went out bragging that she was going to undo Donald Trump's border policy. She did exactly that. We had a record number of illegal crossings. We had a record number of fentanyl coming into our country. And now that she's running for president, or a few months before, she says that somehow she got religion and cared a lot about a piece of legislation. The only thing that she did when she became the vice president, when she became the appointed border czar, was to undo 94 Donald Trump executive actions that opened the border. This problem is leading to massive problems in the United States of America. Parents who...
He nailed her. He's got him nailed.
It's got to stop, and it will when Donald Trump is president again.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, what about our CBS News polling, which does show that a majority of Americans, more than 50%, support mass deportations?
60 to 65%.
We fixed this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this, and Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this.
The American people want it. He says it's demonizing it.
To bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true, don't do it. There's consequences for this.
And local officers, local police and officers said that it was true about the cats and dogs. But who cares about that? The American people want to deport, and he's saying you can't because feelings?
Law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point. And when it becomes a talking point like this, we dehumanize and villainize other human beings.
Tim,
Governor, your time is up. Senator, I'll give you 1 minute, but let me just ask you the question first. The governor has made the point, and I think as a sitting lawmaker, you know that Congress controls the purse strings and any funding. So you have said repeatedly that Donald Trump would, through executive action, solve this. Do you disagree that Congress controls?
She's trying to clean it up and change the conversation.
Many of the changes that you would actually want to implement. You have 1 minute.
Look, Margaret, first of all, the gross majority of what we need to do at the southern border is just empowering law enforcement to do their job. I've been to the southern border more than our border czar, Kamala Harris, has been, and it's actually heartbreaking because the Border Patrol agents, just want to be empowered to do their job. Of course, additional resources would help, but most of this is about the president and the vice president empowering our law enforcement to say, if you try to come across the border illegally, you've got to stay in Mexico, you've got to go back through proper channels. Now, Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed, you've got hospitals that are overwhelmed, you have got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border. It is a disgrace, Tim. And I actually think, I agree with you. I think you want to solve this problem, but I don't think that Kamala Harris does.
Senator, your time is up. Governor, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, well, it is law enforcement that asked for the bill. They helped craft it. They're the ones that supported it.
Helped, but not the final version.
Of continuing to bring this up, of not dealing with it, of blaming migrants for everything. On housing, we could talk a little.
He was blaming Kamala Harris. He wasn't blaming the migrants.
Less affordable, but it becomes a blame. Look, this bill also gives the money necessary to adjudicate. I agree. It should not take 7 years for an asylum claim to be done. This bill gets it done in 90 days. Then you start to make a difference in this, and you start to.
How about don't let them in the first place?
I don't talk about my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about to the least.
Then why are you bringing up your faith if you don't talk about your faith?
Most Americans, they simply want order to it. This bill does it. It's funded. It's supported by the people who do it, and it lets us keep our dignity about how we treat other people.
Thank you, Governor. And just to clarify.
So he wants to bring in race. He's trying to bring race into this where it isn't. This isn't about race. It's about law.
Oops.
Well, Margaret, but
thank you, Senator. We have so much to get to.
Margaret, I think it's important because
we're going to turn out of the economy. Thank
Margaret,
you.
the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check, and since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created.
Oh, they just cut off their mics.
The audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora.
Thank you, Margaret. The economy is a top concern for voters. Each of your campaigns has released an economic plan. So let's talk about the specifics. Governor Walz, Vice President Harris unveiled a plan that includes billions in tax credits for manufacturing, housing, and a renewed child tax credit. The Wharton School says your proposals will increase the nation's deficit by $1.2 trillion. How would you pay for that without ballooning the deficit? Governor, I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. And Kamala Harris and I do believe in the middle class because that's where we come from. We both grew up in that. We understand. So those of you out there listening tonight, you're hearing a lot of stuff back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. That's what this is supposed to happen. You should be listening. How's this going to impact me? The bold forward plan that Kamala Harris put out there is talking about this housing issue. The one thing is there's 3 million new houses proposed under this plan.
Projects built by the government.
And to get you in a house. A house is much more than just an...
In other words, the ghetto. Do you want to live in a government ghetto?
And then making sure that the things you buy every day, whether they be prescription drugs or other things, that there's fairness in that. Look, the $35 insulin is a good thing, but it costs $5 to make insulin. They were charging $800 before this law went in.
And Trump lowered the insulin prices before Biden raised back up the insulin prices.
Prices went down on rent 4%. It's working. And then making sure tax cuts go to the middle class. $6,000 child tax credit. We have one in Minnesota.
That's for 1 year. If you have a newborn, it doesn't count from year 1 to 21.
Right thing for families. And then getting businesses off the ground. The law as it stands right now is $5,000 tax credit for small business, increasing that to $50,000. Now,
it makes absolutely no difference. It costs $250,000 just to even try and start a business.
He kept it. He took folks to Mar-a-Lago, said, you're rich as hell, I'm going to give you a tax cut. He gave the tax cuts that predominantly went to the top class. What happened there was...
Everybody had a good economy. The tax cuts under Trump actually made the economy better. That is a fact.
On everything we bring in. Everyone agrees, including businesses, it would be destabilizing it, it would increase inflation and potentially lead to a recession. Look, this is simple for you. Where are we going? Kamala Harris has said to do the things she wants to do. We'll just ask the wealthiest to pay their fair share.
They already pay 70%. Top 5% spend 70% of all taxes. What is the fair share?
Senator, I want to give you a moment to respond on that. But similarly, the Wharton School has done an analysis of the Trump plan and says it would increase the nation's deficit by $5.8 trillion. My question is the same for you. How do you pay for all that without ballooning?
Wait a minute. She left out the fact that the Wharton School said the Trump plan is better than the Kamala Harris plan, and I read that. So, yes, Wharton says Trump is better than Kamala, and she left that out in CBS. That is bias.
Is that Kamala Harris has already done it. The vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies, and what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%, open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago.
That's just the line. He's going to hammer that all night. That, do it now. Do it now. Oh, whoa, go.
Economic plan is not just a plan, but it's also a record. A lot of those same economists attack Donald Trump's plans, and they have PhDs, but they don't have common sense and they don't have wisdom, because Donald Trump's economic policies delivered the highest take-home pay in a generation in this country.
Well, the Wharton plan also goes out 30 years, which obviously none of these policies are going to be in effect in 30 years. But again, Wharton said that Trump's plan is better than Kamala's plan on the short term.
Now, Tim admirably admits that they want to undo the Trump tax cuts. But if you look at what was so different about Donald Trump's tax cuts, even from previous Republican tax cut plans, is that a lot of those resources went to giving more take-home pay to middle class and working class Americans. It was passed in 2017, and you saw an American economic boom unlike we've seen in a generation in this
Vance
country.
is prepared.
That is a record that I'm proud to run on, and we're going to get back to that common sense wisdom so that you can afford to live the American dream again. I know a lot of you are struggling. I know a lot of you are worried about paying the bills. It's going to stop when Donald Trump brings
Appeal
back
to
common
the
sense to
public.
this country.
Nice.
Governor, do you want to respond to that? What has Kamala Harris done for the middle
Yeah,
class?
well, Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing
Okay, we were in a lockdown globally. That's not Donald Trump's fault.
depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted.
He didn't say that.
Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump. And the same thing goes.
Those same people told you that the jab would have no side effects and that it would prevent you from being able to get sick. And that wasn't true. So, no, there's caveats to this.
In the last year as president. That's what's wrong with the system. There's a way around it, and he's bragged about that. We're just asking for fairness in it, and that's all you want.
You have a minute.
Governor, you say trust the experts. But those same experts for 40 years said that if we shipped our manufacturing base off to China, we'd get cheaper goods. They lied about that. They said if we shipped our industrial base off to other countries, to Mexico and elsewhere, it would make the middle class stronger. They were wrong about that. They were wrong about the idea that if we made America less self-reliant, less productive in our own nation, that it would somehow make us better off, and they were wrong about it. And for the first time in a generation, Donald Trump had the wisdom and the courage.
Look at Tim's face. He's just bobbing all over the place.
It anymore. We're bringing American manufacturing back. We're unleashing American energy. We're going to make more of our own stuff. And this isn't just an economic issue. I mean, I've got 3 beautiful little kids at home, 7, 4, and 2, and I love them very much.
Appeal to the public
Right now. But look, so many of the drugs, the pharmaceuticals that we put in the bodies of our children are manufactured by nations that hate us. This has to stop, and we're not going to stop it by listening to experts. We're going to stop it by listening to common sense wisdom, which is what Donald Trump governed on.
Senator, your time is up. Governor Walz, can you address that? I mean, voters say they trust Donald Trump on the economy more. Why?
If you're listening tonight and you want billionaires to get tax cuts, you heard what the numbers were.
Yeah, we know how we were living 4 years ago versus how we're living now, so it was better then.
Overseas, but I understand that, look, we produce soybeans and corn. We need to have fair trading partners. That's something that we believe in. I think the thing that most concerns me on this is Donald Trump was the guy who created the largest trade deficit in American history with China. So the rhetoric is good. Much of what the senator said right there,
Forget about the rhetoric. How much did you pay for your food? Look at your grocery bills for 4 and 5 years ago and compare them today, and which one is higher? It's not rhetoric when you're actually paying more today than you were in the past.
And we saw people profit. Folks that are venture capital in some cases, putting money into companies that were overseas. We're in agreement that we bring those home. The issue is Donald Trump is talking about it. Kamala Harris.
No, actually, Donald Trump did bring businesses back from overseas that had left under Obama. They came back with Trump, and then they left again with Biden.
Notice what Governor Walz just did is he said, first of all, Donald Trump has to listen to the experts. And then when he acknowledged that the experts screwed up, he said, well, Donald Trump didn't do nearly as good of a job as the statistics
that's a
show
gross generalization.
that he did. So what Tim Walz is doing, and I honestly, Tim, I think you got a tough job here because you've got to play whack-a-mole. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver rising take-home pay, which of course he did. You've got to pretend that Donald Trump didn't deliver lower inflation, which of course he did, and then you simultaneously got to defend Kamala Harris's atrocious economic record, which has made gas, groceries, and housing unaffordable for American citizens. I was raised by a woman who would sometimes go into medical debt so that she could put
big burn. He just burned up Tim.
What it's like to not be able to afford the things that you need to afford. We can do so much better. To all of you watching, we can get back to an America that's affordable again. We just got to get back to common sense economic principles.
I hope we have a conversation on health care then.
Senator, Governor.
Please.
Thank you. Margaret?
We have a lot to get to ahead, gentlemen, on many topics. But right now, I want to talk about personal qualifications. The vice president is often the last voice the president hears before making consequential decisions.
Sometimes.
We want to ask you about your leadership qualities. Governor Walz, you said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989.
I think that was his
But Minnesota
honeymoon.
Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy? You have 2 minutes.
Well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this, look, I grew up in small rural Nebraska, town
That's
of
not
400, town that you rode your bike with your buddies till the streetlights come on, and I'm
cares?
proud of that service. I joined the National Guard at 17, worked on family farms.
That's not
and then
answering
I
the question.
used the GI Bill to become a teacher, passionate about it, a young teacher. My first year out, I got the opportunity in the summer of '89 to travel to China. 35 years ago, be able to do that.
Not
I
answering
came
the
back
question.
home and then started a program to take young people there. We would take basketball teams, we would
Not
take
answering the
baseball
question.
teams, we would take dancers, and we would go back and forth to China. The issue for that was to try and learn. Now look, my community knows who I am. They saw where I was at.
Not answering
look,
the
I will be
question.
the first to tell you, I have poured my heart into my community. I've tried to do the best I can, but I've not been perfect. And I'm a knucklehead at times, but it's always been about that. Those same people elected me to Congress
Not
for 12
answering the
years.
question.
And in Congress, I was one of the most bipartisan people, working on things
Not
like
the
farm bills
question.
that we got done, working on veterans benefits. And then the people of Minnesota were able to elect me to governor twice. So look, my commitment has been
Completely dodging the question in every single step.
I will say more than anything. Many times I will talk a lot. I will get caught up in the rhetoric. But being there, the impact it made, the difference it made in my life, I learned a lot about China. I hear the critiques of this. I would make the case that Donald Trump should have come on one of those trips with us. I guarantee you he wouldn't be praising Xi Jinping about COVID. And I guarantee you,
No, he might have been indoctrinated.
he ends up losing. So this is about trying to understand the world. It's about trying to do the best you can for your community.
No, the question is, what about the discrepancies, which you have not answered?
Whether it be through teaching, which I was good at, or whether it was being a good soldier or was being a good member of Congress, those are the things that I think are the values that people care about.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Okay, so he just wasted our time.
Thank you, Governor.
He wasted the
Senator
public's time.
Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler. I know you've been asked many times, and you've said you regret those comments and explained you then voted for Donald Trump in 2020. But the Washington Post reported new messages last week in which you also disparaged Trump's economic record while he was president, writing to someone in 2020, quote, Trump thoroughly failed to deliver his economic populism. You're now his running mate, and you've shifted many of your policy stances to align with his. If you become vice president, why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record. But most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on. And yeah, when you screw up, when you misspeak, when you get something wrong and you change your mind, you ought to be honest with the American people about it. It's one of the reasons, Margaret, why I've done so many interviews is because I think it's important to actually explain to the American people where I come down on the issues and what changed.
burned. They're not doing any interviews.
Margaret, I've been extremely consistent that I think there were a lot of things that we could have done better in the Trump administration the first round if Congress was doing its job. I strongly believe, and I've been a United States Senator, that Congress is not just a high-class debating society. It's not just a forum for senators and congressmen to whine about problems. It's a forum to govern. So there were a lot of things on the border, on tariffs, for example, where I think that we could have done so much more if the Republican Congress and the Democrats in Congress had been a little bit better about how they govern the country. They were so obsessed with impeaching Donald Trump, they couldn't actually govern. And I want to talk about this tariff issue in particular, Margaret, because Tim just accused this of being a national sales tax. Look, the one thing, and you're probably surprised to hear me praising Joe Biden, but the one thing that Joe Biden did is he continued some of the Trump tariffs that protected American manufacturing jobs. And it's the one issue, the most pro-worker part of the Biden administration, it's the one issue where Kamala Harris has run away from Joe Biden's record. Think about this. If you're trying to employ slave laborers in China at $3 a day, you're going to do that and undercut the wages of American workers unless our country stands up for itself and says you're not accessing our markets unless you're paying middle-class Americans a fair wage.
Senator, your time is up. Nora?
Thank you. Now to the issue of reproductive rights. Governor Walz, after
abortion,
Roe versus Wade was overturned, you signed a bill into law that made Minnesota one of the least restrictive states in the nation when it comes to abortion. Former President Trump said in the last debate that you believe abortion, quote, in the 9th month is absolutely fine. Yes or no?
Abortion.
Is that what you support? I'll give you 2 minutes.
That's not what the bill says, but look, this issue is what's on everyone's mind. Donald Trump put this all into motion. He brags about how great it was that he put the judges in and overturned Roe versus Wade, 52 years of personal autonomy. And then he tells us, oh, we send it to the states. It's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Amanda Zaworski would disagree with you on it's a beautiful thing. A young bride in Texas waiting for their child at 18 weeks. She has a complication, a tear in the membrane. She needs to go in. The medical care at that point needs to be decided by the doctor. And that would have been an abortion. But in Texas, that would have put them in legal jeopardy.
That's a lie. The health of the life of the mother is a concern that is allowed for.
In Kentucky, Hadley Duvall, a 12-year-old child raped and impregnated by her stepfather.
Incest is allowed for abortions in every single state. So he's lying again.
There is no right in this. So in Minnesota, what we did was restore Roe versus Wade. We made sure that we put women in charge of their health care. But look, this is not where, if you don't know Amanda or a Hadley, you soon will. Their Project 2025 is going to have a registry.
There's Project 2025 isn't anything like what he's described. I have read it.
And limit access, if not eliminate access to infertility treatments. For so many of you out there listening, me included, infertility treatments are why I have a child. That's nobody else's business, but those things are being proposed. And the catch-all on this is, well, the states will decide what's right for Texas might not be right for Washington.
Yes.
It's not how this works.
Yes, it is how it works.
Right. We have seen maternal mortality skyrocket in Texas, outpacing many other countries in the world. This is about health care. In Minnesota, we are ranked first.
Okay, you can go to another state then. Then everyone in Texas can go to Minnesota if they think it's much better.
A federal pregnancy monitoring agency?
No, Nora, certainly we won't. And I want to talk about this issue because I know a lot of Americans care about it, and I know a lot of Americans don't agree with everything that I've ever said on this topic. And, you know, I grew up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. And I think that what I take from that as a Republican who proudly wants to protect innocent life in this country, who proudly wants to protect the vulnerable, is that my party, we've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us. And I think that's one of the things that Donald Trump and I are endeavoring to do.
But that's why the federal government shouldn't be involved in it, because we don't trust the government. Let's make it closer to the individual by making it smaller government involved, not federal government.
To make it easier for young families to afford a home so they can afford a place to raise that family. And I think there's so much that we can do on the public policy front just to give women more options. Now, of course, Donald Trump has been very clear that on the abortion policy specifically, that we have a big country and it's diverse. And California has a different viewpoint on this than Georgia. Georgia has a different viewpoint from Arizona. And the proper way to handle this, as messy as democracy sometimes is to let voters make these decisions, let the individual states make their abortion policy. And I think that's what makes the most sense in a very big, a very diverse, and let's be honest.
Tim was shaking his head no. He doesn't want voters to be in charge of anything.
To respond and also answer the question about restrictions.
Yeah, well, the question got asked and Donald Trump made the accusation that wasn't true about Minnesota. Well, let me tell you about this idea that there's diverse states. There's a young woman named Amber Thurman. She happened to be in Georgia, a restrictive state. Because of that, she had to travel a long distance to North Carolina to try and get her care. Amber Thurman died in that journey back and forth. The fact of the matter is,
what were the other comorbidities? What were the other causes?
And your rights, as basic as the right to control your own body, is determined on geography. There's a very real chance had Amber Thurman lived in Minnesota, she would be alive today.
Amber Thurman, okay.
That's why the restoration of Roe versus Wade. When you listen to Vice President Harris talk about this subject, and
I am absolutely sure that if you look up Amber Thurman, you will find out that she didn't die because of not getting the abortion, but she died because of something else along the way, that there was a comorbidity.
That's the problem.
Governor, your time is up. Senator, let me ask you about that. He mentioned, was, I think, referring to a national ban. In the past, you have supported a federal ban on abortion after 15 weeks. In fact, you said if someone can't support legislation like that, quote, you are making the United States the most barbaric pro-abortion regime anywhere in the entire world. My question is, why have you changed your position?
Well, Nora, first of all, I never supported a national ban. I did when I was running for Senate in 2022 talk about setting some minimum national standard. For example, we have a partial birth abortion ban in place in this country at the federal level. I don't think anybody's trying to get rid of that, or at least I hope not, though I know that Democrats have taken a very radical pro-abortion stance. But Nora, you know, one of the things that changed is in the state of Ohio, we had a referendum in 2023, and the people of Ohio voted overwhelmingly, by the way, against my position. And I think that what I learned from that, Nora, is that we've got to do a better job at winning back people's trust. So many young women would love to have families. So many young women also see an unplanned pregnancy as something that's going to destroy their livelihood, destroy their education, destroy their relationships. And we have got to earn people's trust back. And that's why Donald Trump and I are committed to pursuing pro-family policies, making childcare more accessible, making fertility treatments more accessible.
Good point, Grace. Grace points out that, you know what? Democrats say you had to get the jab even if you were pregnant.
The pro-abortion piece of that. No, we're not. We're pro-women. We're pro-freedom to make your own choice. We know what the implications are to not be that. Women having miscarriages, women not getting the care, physicians feeling like they may be prosecuted for providing that care. And as far as making sure that we're educating our children and giving them options, Minnesota's a state with one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates. We understand that too. We know that the options need to be available, and we make that true. We also make it, we're a top 3 state for the best place to raise children. But these two things, to try and say that we're pro-children, but we don't like this, or you guys are pro-abortion, that's not the case at all.
That doesn't mean Idaho should be.
Freedoms for women to make their choices, and we're going, and Kamala Harris is making the case, to make options for children more affordable, a $6,000 child tax credit.
1 year.
But we're not going to base that on the backs of making someone like Amber Thurman drive 600 miles to try and get health care.
No,
Senator?
she didn't
May I
have to
respond
do
to that? First of all, Governor, I agree with you. Amber Thurman should still be alive, and there are a lot of people who should still be alive, and I certainly wish that she was. And maybe you're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric. And that's why I use that word, Nora, is because some of what we've seen, do you want to force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions against their will? Because Kamala Harris has supported suing Catholic nuns to violate their freedom of conscience. We can be a big and diverse country where we respect people's freedom of conscience and make the country more pro-baby and pro-family. But please.
Yes, Governor, please respond.
Look, this is one where there's always something there. This is a very simple proposition. These are women's decisions to make about their health care decision.
Was he right? Was that the legislation?
Do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved. I use this line on this, just mind your own business on this. Things worked best when Roe versus Wade was in place.
Then we don't know. Mind your business and do what the government says are not the same thing.
Increasing funding for children, it doesn't increase us from making sure that once that child's born, like in Minnesota, they get meals, they get early childhood education, they get health care. So the hiding behind we're going to do all these other things when you're not proposing them in your budget. Kamala Harris is proposing them. She's proposing all those things to make life easier for families.
I asked a specific question, Governor. You gave me a slogan as a response.
It's not the case. It's not true. That's not what the law says. So they fact-checked it with President Trump.
Gentlemen, there's a lot to discuss. We have to move on, and we're going to be right back with much more of the CBS News Vice President.
Okay, so so far, well, first of all, sorry everyone. I thought I had switched over to the screen. I'm looking at the debate itself directly, and I thought you guys were watching it with me. I'm actually responding. You should have been able to hear it, and I apologize if you weren't able to. You should have been able to hear it if you were just responding to me looking at the screen. So I apologize about that. In addition to that, so far, I think it has been a slam dunk so far for J.D. Vance. I think he's far more prepared. He is far more knowledgeable. He has made the case for the policies under Donald Trump far better than we've seen Tim Walz make the case for Kamala Harris. I think something is wrong. I know there was a couple of people who were commenting earlier that Tim Walz, he's interrupting the way he speaks. Like he has a prepared, memorized statement, and then he just stopped. Either like he didn't remember it or that he got confused. I don't know exactly what was going on with him, but he just stared like a deer in the headlights, froze, and then picked back up. Something was very odd about that. He's very nervous. He's very sweaty. He's very jittery. He's moving all over the place. He doesn't seem vice presidential. He doesn't seem like he's in control. I'm talking about Tim Walz. And he doesn't seem like he's really able to answer. So far, he has been slammed over and over again by J.D. Vance when he has made the simple statement, if Kamala is so brilliant, if she has such great plans, why aren't any of them in place now? Why aren't we doing these great things she says that she thinks will happen, and we have to wait until January 2025 before she'll ever give them to us, before we can ever start to do that? There's a lot of things about the abortion that are incorrect, because there is no state in America where a woman cannot get an abortion if it's risking the life of the mother, incest, rape. Those are absolutely covered in every single state in America. So that's not true. I think it's not the most exciting debate so far, but it has been very consistent. I think it's been very eye-opening. We can see which is the stronger vice president. I think it's very clear. And I would ask a very simple question. Which one of these vice presidential candidates do you want negotiating with Chairman Xi, talking to Kim Jong-un, who's going to go over and talk to Iran, or talk to Mexico or Guatemala or Venezuela. Which one of these two men do you think is going to be more impressive to world leaders when speaking on behalf of the United States? If he had to go to Hamas tomorrow, which one of these men do you want negotiating for your American hostages to get them released from Hamas in Gaza? Who do you want? Tim Walz, who's pausing and stuttering and sweating and he looks like he's going to collapse? Or do you want J.D. Vance, who looks like he's in control and looks like he's calm, cool, collected, and that he is authoritative? Which one do you want as vice president? That's the ultimate answer here. In listening to them, which one will represent America better? And I have to say, objectively, so far, that answer isn't Tim Walz. It is absolutely J.D. Vance. That's my opinion so far, but we'll see exactly if that's the case. But let's see. I think they're going to be coming back in just a second. Let me make sure. Okay, I put us back. That was the first thing I wanted to make sure of. In the comments, I see Tony says how something is written. The way that the law is written isn't how it's interpreted and how they act on it. That's true. Tony says that J.D. Vance is smoking hot.
Welcome back to the CBS News vice presidential debate. We want to turn now to America's gun violence epidemic.
Oh, guns.
The leading cause of death for children and teens in America is by firearms. Senator Vance.
That's not true.
You oppose most gun legislation that Democrats claim would curb gun violence. You oppose red flag gun laws and legislation to ban certain semi-automatic rifles, including AR-15s.
Yes.
So let me ask you, earlier this year, for the first time, the parents of a school shooter were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Punished for their
child's
actions.
Do you think holding parents responsible could curb mass shootings? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, Nora, on that particular case, I don't know the full details, but I certainly trust local law enforcement and local authorities to make those decisions. I think in some cases the answer is going to be yes, and in some cases the answer is going to be no. And the details really matter here, of course. For example, if a kid steals a gun, that's going to be different than if a parent hands over a gun knowing that their kid is potentially dangerous.
Good point.
But look, I want to just sort of speak as a father of 3 beautiful little kids, and our oldest is now in 2nd grade. And like a lot of parents, we send our kids to school with such hope and such joy and such pride at their little faces on the first day of school. And we know, unfortunately, that a lot of kids are going to experience this terrible epidemic of gun violence. And of course, our hearts go out to the families that are affected by this terrible stuff. And we do have to.
Actually, the number is not that high relative to the United States.
Better on this. The question is just how do we actually do it? Now, here's something that really bothers me and worries me about this epidemic of violence. The gross majority, close to 90% in some of the statistics I've seen, of the gun violence in this country is committed with illegally obtained firearms. And while we're on that topic, we know that thanks to
the number is extremely high.
We've seen a massive influx in the number of illegal guns run by the Mexican drug cartel. So that number, the amount of illegal guns in our country is higher today than it was 3.5 years ago.
That's
true.
But
what do we do about the schools? What do we do to protect our kids? And I think the answer is, and I say this not loving the answer, because I don't want my kids to go to school in a school that feels unsafe or where there are visible signs of security. But I unfortunately think that we have to increase security in our schools. We have to make the doors lock better. We have to make the doors stronger. We've got to make the windows stronger. And of course, we've got to increase school resource officers, because the idea that we can magically wave a wand and take guns out of the hands of bad guys, it just doesn't fit with recent experience. So we've got to make our schools safer. And I think we've got to have some common sense bipartisan solutions for how to do that.
Governor, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out. In Minnesota, we've enacted
99.994 of all gun owners in America are law-abiding and are not a problem.
we've got folks that won't allow research to be even done on gun violence. And this idea that we should just live with it, and here's what I do think, that this is a good start to the conversation. I 100% believe that Senator Vance hates it when these kids, it's abhorrent and it breaks your heart. I agree with that.
No one disagrees with
that's
that.
not far enough when we know there are things that work. I've spent time in Finland and schools. They don't have this happen.
Finland is not the United States with 330 million people from all across the world with different ideologies, different religions, different backgrounds, different everything. You can't say the Finns or socialism is the answer for the United States when it doesn't work there.
Harris, as an attorney general, worked on this issue. She knows that it's there. No one's trying to scaremonger and say we're taking your guns, but I ask all,
Yes, you are saying that.
do you want your schools hardened to look like a fort? Is that what we have to go when we know there's countries around the world that their children aren't practicing these types of drills
No, they have to worry about people being stabbed.
to get a fix? These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms and we can make a difference.
Now, when Kamala Harris says she's going to come into my home and take my firearm, which she has said, there is video.
It's a shooting. I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's
appreciate
doing
you saying
okay.
so.
Christ have mercy. It is awful. And I appreciate what Tim said actually about Finland, because I do think it illustrates some of the frankly weird differences between our own country's gun violence problem and Finland. Is okay, first of all, we have way higher rates of mental health abuse or mental health substance abuse. We have way higher rates of depression, way higher rates of anxiety. We unfortunately have a mental health crisis in this country that I really do think that we need to get to the root causes of, because I don't think it's the whole reason why we have such a bad gun violence problem, but I do think it's a big piece of it. Another driver of the gun violence epidemic, especially that affecting our kids, it doesn't earn as many headlines, but is the terrible gun violence problem in a lot of our big cities. And this is why we have to empower law enforcement to arrest the bad guys, put them away, and take gun offenders off the streets. I think there's a whole host of things that we can do here, but I do think at our schools we've got to talk about more security.
Senator, thank you. Governor, you previously opposed an assault weapons ban, but only later in your political career did you change your position. Why?
Yeah, I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was an NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice.
Okay, so if
that's not where we live today. And several things I want to mention on this is talking about.
So he could have a gun and he could be a fence with his gun in his car, but now we can't?
Minnesota are rural suicides. And we have an epidemic of children getting guns and shooting themselves. And so we have, and we should look at all of the issues. Making sure folks have health care and all that, but I want to be very careful. This idea of stigmatizing mental health, just because you have a mental health issue doesn't mean you're violent.
No one said that.
Doing is we start looking for a scapegoat. Sometimes it just is the guns.
No, it's never the gun. The gun is not alive. It is not sentient. It is never the gun.
Conversation. I think there's a capacity to find solutions on this that work, protect Second Amendment, protect our children. That's our priority.
Gentlemen, thank you. Margaret?
Thank you.
It can never be the gun. The gun isn't alive.
To inflation, the high cost of housing and rent. There's a shortage of more than 4 million homes in the United States, and that contributes to the high housing prices. Governor Walz, the Harris campaign promises a $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time home buyers and a $10,000 tax credit. They also promise to build 3 million new homes. Where are you building these homes, and won't handing out that kind of money just drive up prices higher?
No, it's not handing out. We have, first, let me say this issue of housing, and I think those of you listening on this, the problem we've had is that we've got a lot of folks that see housing as another commodity. It can be bought up, it can be shifted, it can be moved around.
Yes.
Those are not folks living in those houses. Those of you listening tonight, that house is a big deal. I bought and owned one house in my life. My mom still lives in the house where I was. And when I think of a house,
Are you saying that Americans can only have one house and not multiple houses?
we need to make it more affordable. And one of the things, as I said, this program that the Vice President is pushing forward and bringing a new way of approaching this is something we're doing in Minnesota.
Lowering interest rates would actually be more effective and more beneficial than giving someone a $25,000 tax credit. That's an absolute fact. That's math.
Folks, look, we can't do it at the federal level, but local folks make it easier to build those homes. And then that down payment assistance. I can tell all of you out there, certainly for me, using the GI Bill was one thing, but a veteran's home loan, the big thing about a veteran's home loan is you don't have to pay the down payment. Those are things that make it there. Now look,
So
you're going to
join
pay
the
it
military.
back, and you're going to pay your mortgage. Those are things that we know in the long run, the appreciated value, the generational wealth that's created from it. And I will give Minneapolis an example. Minneapolis is the one city.
But the assessment of the property value will increase, and it does not help to lower the actual monthly cost of that home. So you're not actually helping people.
Down payment assistance. We get it back.
And where are those houses going to be built? The $3 million homes, that ghetto, that project, where is that going to be built?
All of those things in the long run end up saving our money. And that's the thing that I think we should be able to find some common ground in.
No.
But we can't blame immigrants for the only reason. That's not the case that's happening in many cities. The fact of the matter is that we don't have enough naturally affordable housing, but we can make sure that the government's there to help kickstart it, create that base.
Governor, your time is up. Senator Vance, as far as your campaign's position, the promise is to seize federal lands to build homes, remove regulation, provide tax breaks, and cut back on immigration, which you say pushes up prices.
Yes.
Where are you going to build all the new homes you're promising, and what part of any of this plan will provide immediate relief? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Tim just said something that I agree with. We don't want to blame immigrants for higher housing prices, but we do want to blame Kamala Harris for letting in millions of illegal aliens into this country, which does drive up costs, Tim. 25 million illegal aliens competing with Americans for scarce homes is one of the most significant drivers of home prices in the country. It's why
Look what it's done to hotels.
Increases in home prices that have happened right alongside massive increases in illegal alien populations under Kamala Harris's leadership. Now, Tim just mentioned a bunch of ideas. Now, some of those ideas I actually think are halfway decent, and some of them I disagree with. But the most important thing here is Kamala Harris is not running as a newcomer to politics. She is the sitting vice president. If she wants to enact all of these policies to make housing more affordable, I invite her to use the office that the American people already gave her, not sit around and campaign and do nothing while Americans find the American dream of homeownership completely unaffordable. Now, you asked, Margaret, what would immediately change the equation for American citizens if you lower energy prices? As Donald Trump says, drill, baby, drill.
3 major factors for inflation right now: energy, food, and printing money.
Paying 40% more for diesel, then the lumber he's delivering to the job site to build the house is also going to become a lot more expensive. If we open up American energy, you will get immediate pricing relief for American citizens, not, by the way, just in housing, but in a whole host of other economic goods, too.
He is correct.
Senator Vance, you still have 23 seconds there. Do you want to answer?
Can I have it?
Where, Governor, we will get to you in a moment. But Senator, where are you going to seize the federal lands? Can you clarify?
Well, what Donald Trump has said is we have a lot of federal lands that aren't being used for anything. They're not being used for national park. They're not being used, and they could be places where we build a lot of housing. And I do think that we should be opening up building in this country. We have a lot of land that could be used. We have a lot of Americans that need homes. We should be kicking.
Notice that you never had Walz answer the question. You just got an answer from J.D. Vance. Whether you like it or not, you got an answer. You didn't get that from Walz.
Do you respond to the allegation that the vice president is letting in
Well, of course, that's not true. And again, you have the
affecting
facts. I
housing
guess we
prices?
agreed not to fact check. I'll check it. That, look, crossings are down compared to when Donald Trump left office. But it's, again, blaming and not trying to find the solution.
No,
I was
they're
going to
down
ask
from
on
the
this
peak.
question, are we
Down
going
from
to
the
drill and
peak.
build houses in the same federal land? And I think when people hear federal lands, these are really important pieces of land. Now, Minnesota doesn't have a lot of federal lands. I know in the western part of the
Do you know how much land the federal government owns in New York City? Not all federal land is important grasslands.
Understand the federal lands issue unless we see this, and I worry about this as someone who cares deeply about our national parks and our federal lands. Look, Minnesota, we protect these things. We've got about 20% of the world's fresh water. These lands protect. They're there for a reason. They belong to all of us. But again, this is when you view housing and you view these things as commodities. Like, there's a chance to make money here. Let's take this federal land and let's sell it to people for that. I think there's better ways to do this.
Not all the land is a federal preserve. It's not there for geese and deer. Some of the land is in our major cities and in our suburbs. So he's equating, he's correlating facts that aren't correct.
Your time is up, but Senator, on that point, I'd like for you to clarify. There are many contributing factors to high housing costs. What evidence do you have that migrants are part of this problem?
Well, there's a Federal Reserve study that we're happy to share after the debate. We'll put it up on social media, actually, that really drills down on the connection between increased levels of migration, especially illegal immigration, and higher housing prices. Now, of course, Margaret, that's not the entire driver of higher housing prices. It's also the regulatory regime of Kamala Harris. Look, we are a country of builders. We're a country of doers. We're a country of explorers. But
I like the way that he's correcting when they have misquoted him, and then he answers the question in full. Again, he's answering questions. We're seeing Tim dodge a lot of the questions here and give inexact answers. Whether you like the answers you're hearing from J.D. Vance doesn't matter. He is giving an answer. Walz overwhelmingly is not giving an answer. He's giving you a feeling that he wants you to share.
Is giving it away to millions upon millions of people who have no legal right to be here.
What are the federal regulations? I deal with this as a governor.
You can very quickly reply.
I'm sorry. I get this as a governor, and I don't necessarily disagree with that in some cases, many of those are local, many of them are state. I don't know which ones are federal, but I think whenever we talk regulations, people think they can get rid of them. I think you want to be able to get out of your house in a fire. I think you want to make sure that it's fireproof and those types of things. So which are the regulations? Because the vice president's not responsible for those. Congress writes those.
Governor, thank you. Gentlemen, we have a lot to get to. You're passionate about the housing crisis, I can tell.
The president does lead
Thank you.
the introduction
One of the
many
top
of these
problems
laws.
facing Americans is the high cost of health care. Senator Vance, at the last presidential debate, former President Trump was asked about replacing the Affordable Care Act. In response, he said, "I have concepts of a plan." Since then, Senator, you've talked about changing how chronically ill Americans get health insurance. Can you explain how that would work? And can you guarantee that Americans with pre-existing conditions won't pay more? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, of course, we're going to cover Americans with pre-existing conditions. In fact, a lot of my family members have gotten health care. I believe, members of my family actually got private health insurance, at least for the first time, switched off of Medicaid onto private insurance for the first time under Donald Trump's leadership. And I think that, a lot of people have criticized this concepts of a plan remark. Look, it's very simple common sense. I think as Tim Walz knows from 12 years in Congress, you're not going to propose a 900-page bill standing on a debate stage. It would bore everybody to tears, and it wouldn't actually mean anything because part of this is the give and take of bipartisan negotiation. Now, when Donald Trump was actually president, and again, he has a record to be proud of, prescription drugs fell in 2018 for the first time in a very long time. Under Kamala Harris's leadership, prescription drugs are up about 7%. Under Donald Trump's entire 4 years, they were up about 1.5%. He introduced pricing transparency. Think about healthcare. You go into a hospital, you try to buy something, and nobody knows what it actually costs. That price transparency will actually give American consumers a little bit more choice and will also drive down costs. And we talked about, the reinsurance regulations is what I was talking about. Look, Donald Trump has said that if we allow states to experiment a little bit on how to cover both the chronically ill but the non-chronically ill, it's not just a plan. He actually implemented some of these regulations when he was president of the United States. And I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along. And I think this is an important point about President Trump. Of course, you don't have to agree with everything that President Trump has ever said or ever done. But when Obamacare was crushing under the weight of its own regulatory burden and health care costs, Donald Trump could have destroyed the program. Instead, he worked in a bipartisan way to ensure.
Well, to be fair, he actually did try to destroy it, but he couldn't. He couldn't get through Congress.
So much more that we can do, but I think that Donald Trump has earned the right to put in place some better health care policies. He's earned it because he did it successfully the first time.
Governor?
All right, here's where being an old guy gives you some history. I was there at the creation of the ACA. And the reason it was so important is I come from a major healthcare state.
The ACA has never been fully implemented in the United States to this day. It is that flawed.
First on affordability and accessibility and quality of health care. And so what I know is under Kamala Harris, more people are covered than they have before. And those of you listening, this is critical to you. Now, Donald Trump all of a sudden wants to go back and remember this. He ran on the first thing he was going to do on day one was to repeal Obamacare. On day one, he tried to sign an executive order to repeal the ACA. He signed on to a lawsuit to repeal the ACA, but lost at the Supreme Court, and he would have repealed the ACA.
The ACA is only effective as emergency care. It is not effective preventative care because that's not what it was built for.
Who's your pre-existing conditions? If you're sitting at home and you got asthma, too bad. If you're a woman, probably not. Broke your foot during football, might kick you out. Your kids get kicked out when they're 26.
Now he's giving us the nightmare scenario, but that's not necessarily what we would see replacing the ACA.
Come online, the most common ones that'll be there. But look, this issue, and when Donald Trump said, I've got a concept of a plan, it cracked me up as a fourth grade teacher because my kids would have never given me that. But what Senator Vance just explained might be worse than a concept, because what he explained is pre-Obamacare. And I'll make this as simple as possible because I have done this for a long time. What they're saying is, if you're healthy, why should you be paying more?
Okay, I have a very simple question. If you're so sure that Obamacare is better than having individual health care, then let me ask you, Tim Walz, why do you have private health care? Why don't you have Obamacare? Why don't any of the members of Congress have Obamacare? Why doesn't Kamala Harris have Obamacare?
How you would protect people with pre-existing conditions or laid out that plan.
Well, look, we currently have laws and regulations in place right now that protect people with pre-existing conditions. We want to keep those regulations in place, but we also want to make the health insurance marketplace function a little bit better. Now, what Governor Walz just said is actually not true. A lot of what happened and the reason that Obamacare was crushing under its own weight is that a lot of young and healthy people were leaving the exchanges. Donald Trump actually helped address that problem, and he did so in a way that preserved people's access to coverage who had pre-existing conditions. But again, something that these guys do is they make a lot of claims about if Donald Trump becomes president, all of these terrible consequences are going to ensue. But in reality, Donald Trump was president. Inflation was low. Take-home pay was higher. And he saved the very program from a Democratic administration that was collapsing and would have collapsed absent his leadership. He did his job, which is govern in a bipartisan way and get results, not just complain about problems, but actually solve them.
Governor, did enrollment under the Affordable Care Act go up under the Trump administration?
It's higher now that we've seen it go up. Look, people are using it. The system works. And the question about this of young people or whatever, that's the individual mandate piece of this.
The population increased, so yes, of course, you're automatically required to be in the Obamacare. So yeah, the population went up, and so did the numbers, of course.
Broad enough to cover everyone. That's the only way insurance works. When it doesn't, it collapses. You are asking pre-ACA where we get people out. Look, people know that they need to be on health care. People expect it to be there. And when we are able to make it, and we are making it this way, when we incentivize people to be in the market, when we help people who might not be able to afford it get there, and we make sure then when you get sick and old, it's there for you. Because I heard people say, well, I don't want to buy into Medicare or whatever. Good luck buying health care once you get past 70. So look, the ACA works. We can continue to do better. Kamala Harris did that. The way she made everything better was negotiating those 10 drugs on Medicare for the first time in American history.
Thank you. Margaret,
can I address that?
I apologize. We're out of time. We have a number of subjects to discuss. Margaret?
Let's talk about families in America. There is a child care crisis.
A lot of health questions in this. They don't want to really address a lot of other issues.
Developed countries in the world without a national paid leave program for new parents. Governor Walz, you've said that if Democrats win both the White House and Congress, this is a day one priority for you. How long should employers be required to pay workers while they are home taking care of their newborns? You have 2 minutes.
Who's going to come up with that money?
Well, that's negotiable, and that's what Congress worked. But here's what the deal is. Americans sitting out there right now.
So he doesn't know.
Big company. Look, we're home in Minnesota to some of the largest Fortune 500 companies. Kamala Harris knows that in California. those companies provide paid family and medical leave. One is, I think they're moral and they think it's a good thing, but it also keeps their employees healthy. We in Minnesota passed a paid family and medical leave. You have a child, and I had to go back to work 5 days after my kids were born. This allows you to stay home a certain amount.
Because you didn't give birth to the kids.
That gets the child off to a better start. The family works better. We stay in their employers. We get more consistency in that. So Kamala Harris has made it a priority. We implemented it in Minnesota, and we see growth. That's how you become a pro-business state. But the negotiations on it, and here's the issue. Those big companies are able to offer it. Those of you out there who don't have it, just imagine what happens if you get cancer or your child gets sick. We know what happens. You end up staying home. In some places, that means no paycheck because you've got no protection on that.
Who's going to pay the small business to pay for that person who's out and not working?
He's willing to give those tax breaks to the wealthiest. He's willing to say, bust those unions up, do whatever. What we're saying is the economy works best when it works for all of us. And so a paid family medical leave.
That hasn't been the case for the last 3.5 years. The economy has not worked best under the Bidenomics.
You have to take it at both the supply and the demand side. You can't expect the most important people in our lives to take either our children or our parents to get paid the least amount of money. And we have to make it easier for folks to be able to get into that business and then to make sure that folks are able to pay for that.
And who's going to pay for that business for that employee? Where's that money coming from?
In crisis on this. A federal program of paid family and medical leave and help with this will enhance our workforce, enhance our families, and make it easier to have the children that you want.
Governor, your time is up.
Ultimately, the answer is the poor people have to pay for it because the price gets passed on to them.
Oh, for how long should employers be mandated to pay their employees while they are home taking care of their newborn? You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, first of all, Margaret, a number of my Republican colleagues and some Democrats, too, have worked on this issue. And I think there is a bipartisan solution here because a lot of us care about this issue. I mean, look, I speak from this very personally because I'm married to a beautiful woman who is an incredible mother to our 3 beautiful kids, but is also a very, very brilliant corporate litigator. And I'm so proud of her. But being a working mom, even for somebody with all of the advantages of my wife, is extraordinarily difficult. And it's not just difficult from a policy perspective. She actually had access to paid family leave because she worked for a bigger company. But the cultural pressure on young families and especially young women, I think makes it really hard for people to choose the family model they want. A lot of young women would like to go back to work immediately. Some would like to spend a little time home with the kids.
Yeah, but on the other side, who's paying for this?
Care model that makes choice possible. And I think this is a very important substantive difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris's approach. I mean, look, if you look at the federal programs that we have that support paid family leave right now, the Community Development Block Grant, and there's another block grant program.
They're both dodging the answer on this. Both of them don't want to have an answer on this because no matter what they say, businesses are going to say the same thing I've been saying. Who's paying for it? Who's going to pay for these employees when they're not working, they're not productive, they're not bringing in money? Who's going to come up with that money? It's going to go to the poor people because the price of the goods are going to have to increase to cover that. Oops.
Because look, it is unacceptable. And, you know, of course, Tim and I have been on the campaign trail a lot the past 7 or 8 weeks. And one of the biggest complaints I hear from young families is people who feel like they don't have options, like they're choosing between going to work or taking care for their kids. That is an incredible burden to put on American families. We're the only country that does it. I think we could do a heck of a lot better.
Senator, thank you. You have also said, Senator Vance, many things about the American family. The Federal Reserve says parents will spend nearly as much on child care as they do on housing each month. So I want to get your thoughts on this. President Trump recently said, as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kinds of numbers we'll be taking in. Is President Trump committed to the $5,000 per child tax credit that you have described? You have 1 minute.
Well, what President Trump said, Margaret, I just want to defend my running mate here a little bit, is that we're going to be taking in a lot of money by penalizing companies for shipping jobs overseas and penalizing countries who employ slave laborers and then ship their products back into our country and undercut the wages of American
In other
workers.
words, a tariff.
It's the heart of the Donald Trump economic plan.
It's called a tariff.
Cut taxes for American workers and American families. Cut taxes for businesses that are hiring and building companies in the United States of America, but penalize companies and countries that are shipped.
Tariffs incentivize buying American. That's the whole key.
Saying is that when we bring in this additional revenue with higher economic growth, we're going to be able to provide paid family leave, child care options that are viable and workable for a lot of American families.
Can you clarify how that will solve the child care shortage?
Well, because as Tim said, a lot of the child care shortage is we just don't have enough resources going into the multiple people who could be providing family care options. And we're going to have to, unfortunately, look, we're going to have to spend more money. We're going to have to induce more people to want to provide child care options for American families, because the reason it's so expensive right now is...
Okay, I don't like this answer because they're both being very cagey about how much money is it going to cost, where's the money coming from. And ultimately, it's going to make it more expensive for poor people.
Do you think Congress will agree to the $6,000 credit for newborns and $3,000 credit for children over the age of 6, as your campaign has promised? Is that realistic?
Well, if these members of Congress are listening to anybody, I can tell you, and this is the biggest issue. Everybody listening tonight knows. I mean, I'm sure they were shocked to hear it's not that expensive. And let's be clear, whether it's $5,000 or $6,000, that pays you about 3 or 4 months. Let's be clear of where we're at on this. It's because we got out of an imbalance on this. We thought we were going to get by not paying people. I don't think Senator Vance and I are that far apart. I'm not opposed to what he's talking about on options. We've done scholarships types of things. I think we need to be open to making the case. But the issue here is, the question you asked is, you're not going to pay for it with these tariffs. That's just adding another $4,000 on the family and taking less. So not only do they not get the money to pay.
Trump had tariffs in his first administration. So yes, tariffs can be effective at encouraging people to buy American, which then directly helps the American economy.
Sure, they'll talk about taxes sometime, but they will lead with child care and they will lead with housing, because we know the problem is, especially in a state like Minnesota, we need more workers because our economy's growing, but we need the workforce.
Governor, thank you. We need to move on. Nora?
Let's talk about the state of democracy, the top issue for Americans after the economy and inflation. After the 2020 election, President Trump's campaign and others filed 62 lawsuits contesting the results. Judges, including those appointed by President Trump and other Republican presidents, looked at the evidence and said there was no widespread fraud.
Keywords: widespread.
State in the nation, Republicans
and there were no audits, and many of the cases, especially at the Supreme Court, were ruled moot.
Electors to Congress for January 6th. Senator Vance, you have said you would not have certified the last presidential election and would have asked the states to submit alternative electors. That has been called unconstitutional and illegal. Would you again seek to challenge this year's election results, even if every governor certifies the results? I'll give you 2 minutes.
Well, Nora, first of all, I think that we're focused on the future. We need to figure out how to solve the inflation crisis caused by Kamala Harris's policies, make housing affordable, make groceries affordable, and that's what we're focused on. But I want to answer your question because you did ask it. Look, what President Trump has said is that there were problems in 2020, and my own belief is that we should...
There were, and the courts have proven that there were issues in 2020.
And that's all I've said, and that's all that Donald Trump has said. Remember, he said that on January the 6th, the protesters ought to protest peacefully. And on January the 20th, what happened? Joe Biden became the president. Donald Trump left the White House. And now, of course, unfortunately, we have all of the negative policies that have come from the Harris-Biden administration. I believe that we actually do have a threat to democracy in this country, but unfortunately, it's not the threat to democracy that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to talk about. It is the threat of censorship. It's Americans casting aside lifelong friendships because of disagreements over politics. It's big technology companies silencing their fellow citizens. And it's Kamala Harris saying that rather than debate and persuade her fellow Americans, she'd like to censor people who engage in misinformation.
Yeah,
I think that is a much bigger threat to democracy than anything that we've seen in this country in the last 4 years, in the last 40 years. Now, I'm really proud, especially given that I was raised by two lifelong blue-collar Democrats, to have the endorsement of Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, lifelong leaders in the Democratic coalition. And of course,
Slam that third party. Slam third parties against the Democrats.
united behind a basic American First Amendment principle that we ought to debate our differences. We ought to argue about them. We ought to try to persuade our fellow Americans. Kamala Harris is engaged in censorship at an industrial scale. She did it during COVID. She's done it over a number of other issues. And that, to me, is a much bigger threat to democracy than what Donald Trump said when he said that protesters should peacefully protest on January the 6th.
Governor?
Well, I've enjoyed tonight's debate, and I think there was a lot of commonality here. And I'm sympathetic to misspeaking on things, and I think I might have with the senator.
Me too, man.
There's one though that this one is troubling to me, and I say that because
No, Walz didn't misspeak. He lied.
choose to acknowledge this. And the fact is that I don't think we can be the frog in the pot and let the boiling water go up. He was very clear. I mean, he lost this election, and he said he didn't. 140 police officers were beaten at the Capitol that day. Some with the American flag, several later died. And it wasn't just in there. In Minnesota, a group gathered on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul and said, we're marching to the governor's residence and there may be casualties. The only person there was my son and his dog, who was rushed out crying by state police.
Oh, please.
That issue, and Mike Pence standing there as they were chanting, hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence made the right decision.
And they didn't. 300,000 people. 300,000 people, and they didn't hang him, and they didn't try and take over the government because there was no plan to do that.
You shake hands, and then you try and do everything you can to help the other side win. That's what was at stake here. Now, the thing I'm most concerned about is the idea that imprisoning your political opponents, already laying the groundwork for people not accepting this. And a president's words matter. A president's words matter. People hear that. So
you mean like the words that have been said about demonizing Donald Trump and MAGA, and that they're evil and that they are going to destroy democracy, that has led to 3 assassination attempts? You mean those kind of words?
January 6th, the first time in American history that a president or anyone tried to overturn a fair election.
He didn't try to overturn the election. He had questions. He challenged it, just like Al Gore did.
That when this is over, we need to shake hands this election, and the winner needs to be the winner. This has got to stop. It's tearing our country apart.
Margaret?
Senator Vance, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, Tim, first of all, it's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power on January the 20th, as we have done for 250 years in this country. We are going to shake hands after this debate and after this election. And of course, I hope that we win, and I think we're going to win. But if Tim Walz is the next vice president, he'll have my prayers, he'll have my best wishes, and he'll have my help whenever he wants it. But we have to remember that for years in this country, Democrats protested the results of elections. Yeah. Hillary Clinton in 2016 said that Donald Trump had the election stolen by Vladimir Putin because the Russians bought like $500,000 worth of Facebook ads. This has been going on for a long time. And if we want to say that we need to respect the results of the election, I'm on board. But if we want to say, as Tim Walz is saying, that this is just a problem that Republicans have had, I don't buy that.
Governor.
January 6th was not Facebook ads. And I think a revisionist history on this. Look,
it's not revisionist, it's a fact.
Don't understand how we got to this point. But the issue was that happened. Donald Trump can do it. And all of us say there's no place for this. It has massive repercussions. This idea that there's censorship to stop people from threatening to kill.
John Kerry said that at the WEF just this weekend.
We've seen that. We've seen that brought up. I just think for everyone tonight, and I'm going to thank Senator Vance. I think this is the conversation they want to hear. And I think there's a lot of agreement. But this is one that we are miles apart on. This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen.
No.
And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's...
It was a threat to the establishment, and in particular the Democratic establishment, but no, it was not a threat to democracy in America.
Just on the future, did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
It's a damning non-answer for you to not talk about censorship. Obviously, Donald Trump and I think that there were problems in 2020. We've talked about it. I'm happy to talk about it further. But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another.
Nice.
Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Yes, you can.
That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Yes,
Tim,
you can.
fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
Senator, the governor does have the floor for 1 minute to respond to you.
Yeah, well, I don't run Facebook. What I do know is...
But the White House did force Facebook to do that.
And now again, and this, I'm pretty shocked by this, he lost the election. This is not a debate. It's not anything anywhere other than in Donald Trump's world. Because look, when Mike Pence...
There were irregularities, there were questions, and yes, he had the right to challenge them, just like Al Gore did, just like Hillary Clinton did.
Where is the firewall with Donald Trump? Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election, and his vice president's not going to stand to it? That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
Governor, your time is up. Thank you, gentlemen. We will be right back with both of our candidates. The CBS News.
Okay, so they're going to be doing some closing statements very quickly. I truly believe that J.D. Vance, we're going to get to the comments in 1 second. J.D. Vance has done a phenomenal job. I think he's been very strong. I think he's had very clear answers. I like the fact that he is not just politicking and supporting Donald Trump, but he's also answering the question. So he's able to do both things in the time that's allotted. Whereas we're seeing Tim Walz, he's barely able to answer the questions themselves. He has dodged quite a few. J.D. Vance has dodged a couple as well. But we've seen more. Tim Walz has dodged more of the questions, and he has been trying to negatively paint, obviously, Donald Trump and as Orange Man bad, rather than actually answer and try and give America a clear understanding of what Kamala Harris plans to do. I think that's very important. Let me go back to the comments, and I see John has joined us, and he asked, "Is Tim Walz going to cry?" I think he did look like he was going to cry there. I think that somewhere between talking about January 6th, talking about the election, and talking about censorship, that Tim Walz was ready to break down. I don't think he was ready for all of that. I don't think he was prepared for it. I think he was caught off guard, and he felt bad about that he wasn't able to properly answer that. I think that's why he got emotional there. John says that Tim Walz looks so sad. He looks like his soylent is running out. You're funny there, John. And Vance is in complete control. Yeah, I think it's very clear, and we're going to hear afterwards. After this is done, I can't see how MSNBC, CNN, I can't see how the left-leaning news media is going to try and say that Tim Walz won this. He didn't. I don't think he really won any individual question, and I don't think that he's winning any new voters. Any of the independents out there, I don't think they're going to change their opinion or suddenly swing over to Kamala Harris because of what they've heard from Tim Walz. And Tim Walz has been misrepresenting some of the facts. Now, mind you, they both haven't been perfect on getting the factual information out there. There's been some discrepancies, but most of those discrepancies have been coming from Tim Walz and the left, trying to promote long existing misstatements or ill facts that have come out of the left. So I think J.D. Vance has been doing very well. I think that the whole point going into this debate was that each of the vice presidential candidates were looking to not screw up. They were looking to not damage their, the front runners, their party members. So Tim didn't want to embarrass Kamala. I think he has. I think he has let her down. I don't think he has good enough answers. His antsiness, the sweating, the way that he's panicking, the answers that he is giving, which are quite vague in many cases, and trying to run away from several of the questions. Some of the hints that he has made towards a more progressive ideology, a more socialist ideology, that he's been slipping into some of those answers have been coming out. I think it is clear that he does want to promote more socialism, that he does want to promote more progressivism in America, that he wants big government making all decisions, especially in healthcare. He wants big government making those decisions, not the individual, and not the individual voting on it. That they don't support the 10th Amendment or the 9th Amendment. That's what I think you're seeing from Tim Walz. He's trying to say it as nicely as possible, but I think that's what we're getting. But they're coming back, so I'm going to go right back over.
CBS News Vice Presidential Debate.
Welcome back to the CBS News Vice Presidential Debate. It is now time for the closing statements. Senator Vance won the virtual coin toss and elected to go last. So, Governor Walz, you are first. You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you, Senator Vance. Thank you to CBS News. And most importantly, thank you to all of you. If you're still up and the folks who miss Dancing with Our Stars, I appreciate it. But look, the support of the democracy matters. It matters that you're here. And I'm as surprised as anybody of this coalition that Kamala Harris has built, from Bernie Sanders to Dick Cheney to Taylor Swift, and a whole bunch of folks in between there. And Hollywood. They don't all agree on everything, but they are truly optimistic people. They believe in a positive future of this country, and one where our politics can be better than it is.
No.
And I have to tell you, that better than it is the sense of optimism that there can be an opportunity economy that works for everyone, not just to get by, but to get ahead. And the idea that freedom really means something. Not the freedom of government to be in your bedroom or exam room, but the freedom for you to make choices about yourself. Now, look, we all know who Donald Trump is. He's told us, and as Maya Angelou said, believe him when he told you that. His first inaugural address talked about American carnage. And then he spent 4 years trying to maybe do that. Senator Vance tonight made it clear he will stand with Donald Trump's agenda. He will continue to push down that road. Excuse me. Kamala Harris gives us a different option. Now, I'll have to tell you, I'm going to be careful about the quotes, but there's one that Senator Vance said that does resonate with me. He said, Donald Trump makes the people I care about afraid. A lot of America feels that way. We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that.
No, she has not.
All the while asking everyone, join this movement, make your voices heard. Let's look for a new day where everybody gets that opportunity and everybody gets a chance to thrive.
Well, he tried to put it together, but really, no. Hollywood is not America, and the cronies don't work.
You folks at CBS, and of course the American people, for tuning in this evening. And one of the issues we didn't talk about was energy. And I remember when I was being raised by my grandmother, when she didn't have enough money to turn on the heat some nights because Ohio gets pretty cold at night and because money was often very tight. And I believe, as a person who wants to be your next vice president, that we are a rich and prosperous enough country where every American, whether they're rich or poor, ought to be able to turn on their heat in the middle of a cold winter night. That's gotten more difficult thanks to Kamala Harris's energy policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford a nice meal for your family. That's gotten harder because of Kamala Harris's policies. I believe that whether you're rich or poor, you ought to be able to afford to buy a house. You ought to be able to live in safe neighborhoods. You ought to not have your communities flooded with fentanyl. And that, too, has gotten harder with because of Kamala Harris's policies.
True so far.
Now, I've been in politics long enough to do what Kamala Harris does when she stands before the American people and says that on day one, she's going to work on all these challenges I just listed. She's been the vice president for 3.5 years. Day one was 1,400 days ago, and her policies have made these problems worse. Now, I believe that we have the most beautiful country in the world. I meet people on the campaign trail who can't afford food, but have the grace and generosity to ask me how I'm doing and to tell me they're praying for my family. What that has taught me is that we have the greatest country, the most beautiful country, the most incredible people anywhere in the world. But they're not going to be able to achieve their full dreams with the broken leadership that we have in Washington. They're not going to be able to live their American dream if we do the same thing that we've been doing for the last 3.5 years. We need change. We need a new direction. We need a president who has already done this once before and did it well. Please vote for Donald Trump. And whether you vote for me or vote for Tim Walz, I just want to say I'm so proud to be doing this, and I'm rooting for you. God bless you, and good night.
Senator Vance, thank you. And thank you both for participating.
Okay, so this is the closing statement here, and I don't care about that from CBS. I got to say, in the closing statements, I felt that you were hearing from Tim Walz talking about establishment. Vote for Kamala. He wanted you to vote for Kamala Harris because he wanted to see a vote for establishment. You know, Hollywood supports Kamala Harris, so you should support Kamala Harris. The establishment support Kamala Harris, so you should support Kamala Harris. The fact that she was the machine of the Washington establishment machine is what put her in place, and they're the ones that are supporting her, so you should support her too. That's what Tim Walz was talking about. A big government, the big government machine that doesn't recognize individuals or individual freedom. In listening to Tim Walz, and J.D. Vance, I think J.D. Vance was much more patriotic. He was much more upbeat. He was more about individual freedom and individual style, and talking about celebrating America, America first, MAGA principles. So I think the closing was definitely something that Tim Walz did better in than what we saw with Walz. So let me go to everyone. I truly believe that in this, I was not expecting a whole lot in this entire event. I walked into this openly saying that I had a bias, that my bias was against Tim Walz because of the stolen valor. And that did not change. This did not change my feelings about the stolen valor at all. But putting that aside, listening to the quality of the comments that were being made by both of the candidates, and listening to the amount of facts and data that were being offered to the American people, regardless of whether you thought one thing was true or not true, good or bad, who was offering the most of the of data, of facts, the willingness to show their sources. That was coming mostly from J.D. Vance. What we were hearing is feelings coming from Tim Walz. Tim Walz was really focused about how do you feel? You should feel like this. This is the proper feeling that you should have about Kamala Harris. This is the feeling you should have about Democrats, about big government. And he did let slip several times that he believed in big government, that the federal government should be making decisions for you as an individual. He did make that very clear. I don't think Vance had that. So going to some of the comments here, Tony mentioned he agreed with John that the governor looked like a lame duck and that he looked very ill most of the time. and that they seem to be very pro-communist in many of the statements that were being made by Tim Walz. Grace says Vance had a chance to call out Walz lies, and he didn't. That's true. There were a couple times where we could have seen J.D. Vance really slap, but I think he had already made his case. That's what I think, Grace. I think that J.D. Vance had already won. He won this very early. The first segment of this entire debate, I think, was completely, overwhelmingly in favor of J.D. Vance. And he stomped on Walz completely in that part. And I don't think he needed to keep stepping on Walz. Rather, he did pivot, and we saw that rather than continuing to beat up Walz, not that he didn't, not that he stopped completely, but he focused more on Donald Trump, the message, the future, giving that positive outlook. So in the time that he had, he could have either stomped all over someone he had already beaten, or he could promote the campaign. And he chose, J.D. Vance chose to promote the campaign. I think that was the better decision, but I do agree with you, Grace. There were a couple of chances in there where we could have really seen J.D. Vance step all over Tim Walz. It could have been a real slaughter there. I don't think he needed it, though. I don't think that he suffered for not challenging everything. Now, there were several times that both of them were dodging, kind of like with the how many days do you give for that employers should give to parents who just had a child. Neither one of them wanted to answer that. Neither one of them want to be on the record and be on the hook for X number of days. I understand that. That's something they want to have that debate there and not put it on any of the presidential candidates. I get that. But Klobuchar? Let me show you something. Interesting. There are people there with, what is it, Paulus and Klobuchar. You see the blue, you see these blue signs? This is live afterwards. And so they're letting you know, okay, so this is Senator Klobuchar. This is to let the news media know which elected official is here. And do you notice almost all of them in the CBS meeting room? They're all blue. So it looks like they're trying to, that doesn't mean everyone who's talking in this press conference, they're not all Democrats, but they want people who are just glancing at this, people who are seeing CBS News, they want you to think that everyone who's in the room is a Democrat because all of the posts are blue. It gives that impression. This is psychological. They were thinking this through. So you're going to psychologically think, well, it's blue, so that means it's red, and therefore everyone in the room is a Democrat. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that is. But Grace goes on to say she agrees that Vance won. Vance sold Trump and Trump's plans very well. And that's exactly what he was here to do. That's what this entire debate was about. I don't think it's going to, I think it gets less than half. I think less than half of the voters that were watching the debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are actually going to watch this debate. And I think that while there will be several memes coming out of this, and I think that people will be laughing at Tim Walz for several of things that he said and for the way that he looked, his fidgeting, his several of his expressions throughout this. I think you're going to see a lot of people laughing at Tim Walz. I think Tim Walz, I won't say that he embarrassed himself. I won't say that he embarrassed Kamala Harris, but I think he did damage. He hurt the Harris-Walz campaign. The Democrats, their hurdle just got a little bit higher, I truly believe. I don't think this did them well at all. So I think that's what we see as the net result. I think the average person in America, now I'm not the average person in America, Besides the fact that I think a lot of people did walk in. Oh, wait a minute. Here are some of the comments. Again, this is coming from C-SPAN, and C-SPAN is showing that, some people were upset about Walz and his position on malpractice. I'll keep an eye out on that in case they pop up with some other internet comments. I don't know. Grace says Kamala needs a strong VP. I don't think Tim Walz is a strong VP. He's a strong progressive. Tim Walz is absolutely progressive. And he's definitely, for the far left, he's one of their own. And you can hear it in the policies. And where the strongest that Tim Walz sounded when he was espousing the more progressive ideology, talking about the growth of unions, that everyone should be involved in a union, when he was talking about having federal government controlling individual lives through their mandates and having direct control over individuals' choices, that's when he sounded the strongest and the most confident. And that's the least American kind of ideals. And I think those are the things that are losing the race for Kamala and for Walz, that these are the things that the independents are looking at and going, no, we don't want anything to do with that. We don't want more government. We don't want more government intruding on our lives. I think that's very big. But I could be wrong. Let's see. Grace says, I agree he's far left, but tonight Walz looked weak and frazzled. I agree with you. He looked very weak. He looked very frazzled. He looked like he was, at points, he looked like, I think in the middle of the breaks, they wiped down his face because he seemed to be sweating so much, especially in that first part. He seemed to be so nervous, and his face was so red. And then we would come back from the break, and he would look normal again. So I think they were, hosing him down, essentially, cooling him down, wiping down his face, reapplying his makeup in between those breaks. Because, I don't know, he looked like he was nearly ready to have a heart attack. I guess the question really is, did this change anyone's opinion? And let me just type that out. So the question, I think, is, at the end of the day, did this debate change anyone's mind? And I think that's the important question. I think the answer to that is probably not. If you are a Republican, if you're someone who believes in making America great, if you believe in America first principles, you weren't swayed by this. This didn't change your opinion or your views. You're still voting for Donald Trump. You were going to vote for Donald Trump anyway. If you're someone who believes in the sanctity of respecting veterans and the sacrifices of veterans, Walz did nothing to convince you. You're not going to vote for him just on that principle alone. Nothing has changed. If you were a far left Democrat, someone who believes in protecting, like we started off, where the very first question, and we heard that Walz was supporting Hamas. He was talking about illegal aliens, and that to call out their criminality, which is to break the American law, to enter America without authorization, without any documentation, and to abuse our system, that is a crime. And he said to call it a crime was to dehumanize the illegal aliens. I don't understand that. That just tells you right there. And if you agree with that ideology, that calling an illegal alien if you call an illegal alien exactly what they are, then that's dehumanizing them. Then you love Walz and you love everything that he said, and you love Kamala Harris. But I don't think there's a lot of people who actually fall into that ground, which is why they're having so much trouble in Wisconsin, why they're having so much trouble even in Michigan, why they're losing Pennsylvania. So I don't think any of that changed. Grace mentions that she does know a lot of undecideds who still exist in the Midwest. Tony is mentioning, I wasn't sure about Vance. Now I'm definitely voting for Vance. I can tell you, on this program, I was very public, and I said for a long time that I thought Senator Tim Scott, was the best choice for the vice presidency. And when we saw that J.D. Vance was picked, I was very surprised by that. I didn't expect to see that happen. I still think that Senator Tim Scott is a better choice politically. There's a lot more advantages in having Senator Tim Scott. I think he's just as eloquent a speaker. But I do have to say that I didn't have a high opinion of J.D. Vance. It is a little bit higher now. I still think Senator Tim Scott was a better choice. But I think that J.D. Vance did impress me that he knew his subjects. He knew what he was talking about. He was concise. He was able to shrink the answer into a bite size that the average American could listen to and understand and could see the vision behind it. I think he did a very good job of being very positive and explaining where he changed in his opinion about Donald Trump, where he changed his opinion about some of these issues. I think he did a very good job. So I got to give him respect. I have to say that he did improve in my eyes, but I'm not voting for Donald Trump because of J.D. Vance. Never was. I'm still not. But I am voting for Donald Trump. I'm voting for Trump because of Trump. I'm voting for him for his policies and his overall goals and that he's a strong president. But I am reassured that J.D. Vance is, of the candidates available to the American people, this debate gives me more of an assurance that J.D. Vance is also strong. So it's not that Donald Trump is strong and, the vice president's weak. No, J.D. Vance is a strong vice president, and that's a good thing because Kamala Harris is a weak vice president, and we can see what she has done around the world and how she has made things worse for America. At no point has the work of Kamala Harris internationally, it hasn't helped us. In fact, she's so bad doing international policy that the Biden administration stopped sending her to different countries. They stopped sending her overseas because everywhere she went, she was a failure of such a huge magnitude. She made things worse than before she showed up. And that's why they kept her domestic. And all Kamala Harris has been doing up until they kicked out Biden was collecting money. That's all she was doing. She was doing rallies and trying to get fundraiser to raise money. And she had no other responsibility because everything else she failed at. So I think that's a fair statement there. Let me go through here. So, Joel, you made it. Well, I guess that Larry Sharp might have finished his show. So, Joel, you dropped on by. Good to see you. And by the way, do check out Larry Sharp. See what he's a libertarian. He may have a very different opinion. I don't think he did. We had a very different opinion, me and Larry, about how well Donald Trump did versus Kamala Harris. I think you're going to hear Larry Sharp agree more with me about J.D. Vance than Walz. I think he's going to say J.D. Vance is the winner in this very clearly. I think he's going to agree with more of the policies of J.D. Vance than Tim Walz. But I could be wrong, but I think he is. And you know what? Check out his coverage. I have no problem with that. Also, check out Kit Cabello. Kit is more of a progressive. He's more of a far left. He's with Hard Lens Media. Check out his interview, and I will check out both what Larry had to say. I'll be checking out what Kit had to say to hear the different viewpoints, but I think they're all going to agree with what we're talking about right now. Joel says, I like Vance more every time I hear him speak. Well, he is doing well. He is very well spoken. But he's a Marine. So am I really surprised? No. Grace says, do you think troops being sent to the Middle East will sway independents to Trump? No. But I do believe that we've already had troops throughout the Middle East. And so people hearing that, to answer your question, Grace, hearing that there are troops going into the Middle East, the average person doesn't understand the magnitude of that. They don't understand the complications that brings about, because we have troops in Iraq, we have troops in Syria, we have troops in Israel, we've had troops throughout the entire Middle East. So the average person, they're not thinking of that as, ooh, that's unique or different or unusual. I don't think they see the impact of that. Now, political junkies, people who are following this more, and you say, well, we're adding 45,000 troops. That's a huge number. That's going to ring up alarm bells. That's going to make people say, well, how many are going into Syria, which we know Biden wants to have more American troops in Syria. He doubled the number the first day that he was in office. We know that Americans are under attack in Iraq. And so we've been fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Iraq. As a matter of fact, we just had 37 airstrikes. 2 airstrikes with 37 casualties against ISIS in Syria and in Iraq. We were having fights there. So we're looking at a real increase in the size of troops. This could really easily become something far more violent and far more dangerous if we don't have strong leadership. Now, the saving grace here is, I think that Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, even Putin and Russia, I think they're all trying to get as much as they can, as much land, as much political advantage, as much money in negotiations. They're trying to get everything they can before Trump wins. I think if Trump wins, they see him as a very strong leader. I don't think they want to risk confronting Donald Trump. They didn't do it the first time with him. I think, again, if he's in office, they're not going to try and tempt fate with him, and they're trying to just make the push that they can. But I don't think the average person is going to recognize all of that because they don't follow politics enough, so they're not aware of these intricacies, and so they're not going to notice it unless open warfare happens, unless American troops are being shot actively. Grace says that she likes Scott independent of Trump. Yeah, I think Senator Tim Scott, independent of the election, independent of Trump or Vance, he's a good senator. He's doing a good job. So I agree with you there. Joel says they may need to stop having news media people acting as moderators. They're not capable. I think the moderators were horrendous. And thank you for bringing that up. Joel, I did want to bring that up. The moderators did a horrible job. They said that they weren't going to fact check, and then they did try to fact check by asking leading questions. It's not just that, oh, do you want to respond? It's, do you want to respond to this specific type of question? Regardless of what was actually being said by the candidates, they engineered their own question as if they were trying to, basically they were doing a fact check by saying, hey, here's the thing I want you to ask. It's obtuse, really, you know. They went the long way around. Just let them do the fact check. Instead, they put the fact check and said, answer this specific question, which is a fact check. You said this, answer this question as a follow-up. Well, that's a fact check. Just do your job. But CBS was afraid of offending anyone, and they were afraid of being obvious in the fact that they were trying to fortify the 2024 election. I mean, everyone has seen CNN, ABC, MSNBC, have shown themselves to be blatantly, absolutely biased and in the tank for the Democrats. CBS wanted to try and preserve any of their credibility, and this is the way they did it. I think they did a piss poor job. I think that the moderators ended conversations that both Tim Walz and J.D. Vance were trying to have with each other as well as to the American people, and I think they ended it far too abruptly and incorrectly. There were a couple things that I think they should have had more conversation on and let the American people hear more, but I think they didn't like. They made it very abrupt because they didn't like the answers that were being said, the direction, the type of questions and answers that were being exchanged between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. I mean, they cut the mic on both of them at one point, which I thought was abominable, just because they didn't want to continue to have a conversation on something that both of the candidates thought was very important to tell to the American people. So that's censorship, and I thought that really did not look good for CBS. I don't think any of their moderators did well. Tony says, I think Vance will take the bull by the horns when he needed to. I think he did. I agree with you there. User has been banned has joined us. Hey, great. User has been banned says, watching all the different types of people is a good thing. Yeah, I agree with that. I regularly watch Hardlin's news media, even though Kit and I do not agree on our political ideology. I do find value in hearing some of his viewpoints to try and understand why does he think that. And I value that because he does his homework, he is intelligent, and he does explain himself well. Whether or not I agree with the conclusion he comes to, that's another thing. That's me personally. But at least I can understand his reasoning, and that gives me somewhere where we can talk and maybe find commonality. Same thing with Larry Sharpe, who's a good friend of mine. I've mentioned it many times. He's a libertarian. He's run for governor. He may run for another elected office soon, which would be cool. Again, he has a different point of view, and he brings in a third-party kind of view that I listen to. Not because I agree with everything that he has to say. Sometimes I vehemently don't agree with some of the things that he says. But I do value that he has a viewpoint, that he's intelligent, that he's thought it through, and we can have the conversation and see, okay, how can we use these ideas to improve the life for everyone, to increase the amount of freedom for everyone? Because I can tell you, Kit Cabello, he may be a more left-leaning progressive. He wants more freedom. Larry is a libertarian. He wants more freedom. I am a conservative Republican. I want more freedom. So we all have that commonality. We just have very different ways to get there. And that's why I think it's great to hear those different voices. And that's also why I keep on top of everything. A lot of people wonder sometimes, Mike, how do you know about all these different topics, all these different issues, all these different laws? Because I know people who are smart too, who are very well read. And there's 1,001 people on the far left that I do not know. Laws and ideas that they have that I do not know. And I'm not trying to find. But I listen to some of their pundits, some of their better political commentators, and through them I can learn about, I hadn't heard that idea before. I didn't know about that before. Now I do. Now I know where I can, I'll start researching this person or this idea, this law that I didn't notice before. They've now made me aware of it, and that's how I get to know about so many different ideas. So that's always important. I don't know. I don't think anyone walking in today who had an idea, if you were going to vote for Trump, you're still voting for Trump. If you were going to vote for Kamala Harris, you're voting for Kamala Harris. So the people who are, vote red, vote blue, no matter who, that 20% of the political parties, they're never changing their mind. The majority of Republicans, and Democrats probably aren't going to change their minds. They've already made their decisions. I don't think this made a difference. Talking about the 45% of America that is independent, and when I say that, I mean they have no political affiliation. The largest political affiliation in America is not being in a party or having a political affiliation. Fully, 45% of America does not have a party. They're not part of a party, whether it's a third party or whether it's one of the major parties. They're not aligned with any of that. And these are the people who are watching football instead of paying attention to politics. They're watching the housewives of Succum Silly instead of, paying attention to politics. They're the people who only pay attention to the election after Labor Day, the 3 months, that 3-month window between Labor Day and the election. That's the only time that they're actually paying attention to politics. That's the majority of America, 45%. And I think that most of those people, even they, have made their decision. I think roughly half that, something like 20, 25% of America has already made up their mind. And they've probably made up their mind because of the economics. And those people have they're voting for Donald Trump because they've looked at their paycheck, they looked at their grocery bills. They know that even though Tim Walz was trying to downplay it, the fact is Bidenomics has not worked. Trump did. Trump's policies for everything that they want to say was so terrible and the tariffs didn't work. And yeah, but you had more money in your pocket. The tax cuts worked. Whether they were tax cuts for billionaires, the rich, guess what? You have more money and your bills and everything you bought was cheaper under Trump than it is today. That's a fact. It is irrefutable. And most people, I think, in the independents vote based on that. They remember 4 years ago. They remember Trump. They remember everything was cheaper. It's more expensive now. And even though Biden keeps telling you, even though Kamala has kept telling you that, no, everything's great, they know that's a lie. So I don't think those people change. I think there's only about like 5% of the population of American voters who can have their opinion changed. Only about 5%. That's the race right now. That's the entire election, is roughly about 5% of all the American voters. And I think as we hear more interviews, as we see more speeches, and now that we've had the debates, I think the overwhelming trend is that people are looking at that and they're going, Kamala isn't answering everything. She's avoiding a lot of questions. She's repeating the same answers for every question. She has 3 answers to everything. The same 3 answers fit every question she's asked. That's it. And she keeps repeating that. And Tim Walz is just a cheerleader for Kamala, and he really isn't adding anything separately. He's not bringing anything to this. And he did live up to the very low, at the very beginning of this, I said he was going to live up to the very low expectations that everyone had. And he did. He matched the bottom of the barrel of expectations. He wasn't expected to do well. He didn't do well. So he didn't help. I think we see Donald Trump win the 2024 election with J.D. Vance probably by about 3 points. If we had to go by today, if I had to guess today and make the prediction right now, if the election was tomorrow, Donald Trump would win by about 3%, 3 points, based on what we saw with J.D. Vance tonight. That's what I think. I think if we go further and people start recognizing the pattern, the way that Tim Walz, the way that Kamala Harris are deflecting all of their answers, how they have a very limited set of answers that they try to apply to everything and it doesn't work, how they're misquoting and misstating the truth on a regular basis. They're using lies that have been debunked on a regular basis, that they don't actually quote the factual data. Instead, they quote what they feel. I think the more that they say those things, the more that the American people are not going to vote. And I think that as we see the Middle East become more and more volatile, people are going to say feelings aren't going to solve the problem with Hamas. They're not going to solve the problem with the Houthis. They're not going to solve the problem with Hezbollah and Iran. Feelings aren't joy. The feeling of joy that Walz ended this with. You've got to have joy. We want to have more joy. Joy isn't going to stop Hamas from killing Americans or taking them hostage. It's not going to stop the Houthis from firing off rockets and missiles. It's not going to stop the ballistic missiles coming from Iran. Joy isn't going to do that. You can have as much joy, you can have any kind of feeling you want, but that's not stopping missiles, nor is it making Iran feel like they should stop. Kamala Harris saying she has a whole bunch of joy didn't stop Iran from firing missiles after ballistic missiles at Israel. Didn't happen. They're not afraid of her. They're damn sure not afraid of Joe Biden. No one even talks about Joe Biden anymore. Who knows where Joe Biden is? No one knows. No one cares. He's not. Everyone has understood. He is a zombie part-time president, and no one cares about Joe Biden because he is powerless. He's not even in the picture. But no one's afraid of him, and no one's afraid of Kamala Harris. And I think that's pretty apparent. And as we go forward, I think any conflicts and more conflicts across America, no one's going. That goes against Kamala, because J.D. Vance very correctly did highlight several times, if Kamala is so great, if her plan is so great, she's the vice president. Why isn't that happening now? If it's so wonderful, if it is the solution to everything, why isn't Kamala Harris doing it now? Why hasn't Kamala Harris been talking about this for the last 3.5 years? And, we saw whenever Vance, and he did that at least 4 times throughout the entire event. He could have said more, but he said it 4 times very, very powerfully. And every time that he said, so why isn't she doing it? Which is a simple question. She is the vice president. Why isn't she doing it now? Why isn't she making that argument now? If her policy is so great, if this idea will work so well, why isn't she jumping up and down trying to convince Congress to do it now? Why isn't she telling the American people to do it now? Why isn't she talking with Joe Biden in front of the American people and pushing this idea right now? And Tim Walz had no answer every single time. Not once could he give a good reason for that. Just like Kamala can't answer that question, neither can Tim Walz. And their only answer was to then deflect to Orange Man Bad. And I think that's a horrible answer. It's a useless answer. They should have an answer for that. And because Kamala doesn't have an answer for that, she loses the election. It's just that simple. Grace says, that's the obvious question. Why isn't Kamala doing it now? Yeah. I mean, if she's good enough that the Democrats anointed her without a single vote from rank and file Democrats, if she's so great that she deserved to be anointed and instantly became the presidential candidate once Democrats kicked out Joe Biden, then why does he have nothing to show? If she's so great, why is there nothing there? You would think when they decided they had to pick someone and pick someone fast, you would think they would pick someone who accomplished something. Someone who you could point to and say, this is what they did. They're great at their job. Here's an example of them doing their job great. Like with immigration. And the answer from Tim Walz was, oh, well, Kamala was AG. No one cares. And she was prosecuting gangs and don't care. I don't care about that. I said it during the debate. I'll say it again. I don't care because that's the past. First of all, I don't think she did that great a job in California as is. But separate of that, we're not in she's not California AG. We're not running the race for California. This is for the United States of America. And she has been the border czar since March 24th of 2021. I want to hear, what did she do? How has she made the border better? She has been to the border twice. Once in 2021, right, just as because Donald Trump was going to the border, she went to the border. That was in 2021, June of 2021. Excuse me. And then again this week. She just went this weekend. She was at the border again. In 3.5, almost 4 years, she's been to the border twice. She's in charge of illegal immigration, of reducing illegal immigration in America. That was her job. And she's only been to the border twice? Really? Because she didn't care. That's it. That's the only answer I can come to. And this is who the Democrats picked? I don't get it. I just don't get it. Grace goes on to say, Trump's team needs to push this. Why isn't she doing it now? Well, that was one of the big things in the debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. A lot of people said this, and it was true. Donald Trump should have done what we saw J.D. Vance do and say, you've had 3.5 years. Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you even suggest it? I mean, it's not even that she didn't do it. She hasn't even suggested it. She hasn't even hinted at any of these things. Why not? Grace goes on to say, Joe is at the beach. So now Joe's at the beach and he's not taking care of, well, to be fair, I have seen several sources debunk the picture that was floating around, and I did see the picture saying that Joe Biden is at the beach at the same time that the hurricane, everyone's trying to deal with Hurricane Helene. And they've said that the picture is older, it's an older picture, and that Joe Biden isn't currently at the beach. But here's the thing, who knew? Where has Joe Biden been? Because he isn't actually with the American people dealing with Hurricane Helene. Neither is Kamala Harris. Donald Trump was there today. Donald Trump was giving people gasoline and water and supplies today. Where's Joe Biden? Where's Kamala Harris? They could have been there, and you would think they would. Joe Biden's answer is he was on the phone for 2 hours over this weekend about Helene, about emergency aid. That's ridiculous. This is an answer that Joe Biden had at the end of his press conference talking to the American press pool, the White House press pool, and his answer was, hey, I've been on this. I was talking with people for 2 hours this weekend about Hurricane Helene. That's it, 2 hours. Where's Kamala? I don't know. She's out campaigning somewhere. She should be doing her job as vice president. You notice the moment that she started running for president, she stopped being vice president. She stopped doing anything, her job. She's still got a job. She should be in everywhere that the hurricane hit. She should be there right now. So should Pete Buttigieg. And the entire the entire Biden administration should be active right now trying to help the American people. Half of them are trying to help Kamala Harris get elected. No, your job is, you still have your job. Screw whether or not she gets elected. Go do your job. Maybe then I'll vote for you because you did your job well, but they're not. And that's a problem. That, to me, is a problem. They're so busy politicking, and that's something we've been seeing consistently since day one. The Democrats in the Biden-Harris administration are more concerned about politicking than they are about running the government. They're more worried about maintaining power than they are about using it to help the American people. That's been consistent since day one, and it continues to be consistent even right now. Now, where is Mayor Pete? Where is Pete Buttigieg? No one knows. No one knows. But I do have to put one thing against. J.D. Vance did do one thing that I know why he did it. He shouldn't have done it as much as he did, and he should be called out for it. One thing that he did that was incorrect, and he should be called out for, is that he kept blaming everything that happened in the Biden-Harris administration. He blamed on Kamala Harris alone. So it was all Kamala Harris policies. And Kamala Harris made this decision or that decision. That's been happening over the last 4 years. That's not fair or correct. These are Biden-Harris policies. I mean, Joe Biden, even though he's a zombie, even though he only works 5 days a week, only between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., and Kamala Harris knew it, he's still technically the president. At least part of that time, we saw him being somewhat presidential. So fair is fair. It is Biden-Harris administration policies. It's not just Kamala Harris. So when he blamed everything just on Kamala Harris, I thought that was unfair, because it was both Biden and Harris equally deserve it. I mean, they're the guys in charge. They're the ones with the blame. They're the ones with the failure. So she doesn't get off scot-free. But it is unfair to try and say she's the only one as the cause of the problem, when the cause of the problem is both of them. So I thought that was, I mean, to be fair, that's something he should. I know why he did it, though. I mean, she's the one running for president, and she is in the administration now. Excuse me. She is the one in the administration. She is the one who's running for president. So the buck stops with her. I get it. So I know why he did it, but it is a little unfair. Grace says, okay. So I think that was interesting. All right, folks. So, not the most exciting debate that I have ever covered. Not the most consequential debate that I have ever covered, but it was interesting. I think you're going to see everyone in the news media tonight, tomorrow, they're all going to say J.D. Vance won. True. They're going to say that Tim Walz hurt Kamala, that Kamala and Walz don't have answers. They're going to say that J.D. Vance and Donald Trump, while you may not like the answer, they have answers. They were offering answers. Whether you like them or not is a different question than they actually gave you an answer. Whereas Walz and Harris aren't giving you answers. They're giving you feelings. And that's not enough. That's not substantive enough. And it was, Grace says it was what she expected. It's exactly what I expected. Not surprised by any of it whatsoever. What else can you say? Well, what I'll say is tomorrow at 7 p.m., I'll be with the Liberty First Foundation. We'll be going live. We'll most likely be talking at least a little bit about the debate. We'll also be talking about what's happening with Israel in terms of Iran, how Israel is absolutely going to respond. There is going to be a retaliation by Israel against Iran, guaranteed. What form that's going to take, when that happens, where should America be in this process? Entirely different question. We're going to probably talk a little bit more about the American hostages. Why didn't Tim Walz mention the American hostages? He was talking about humanitarian aid for Hamas. He was talking about helping Hamas, a terrorist organization, but he just conveniently happened to forget that in the 1,400 people that died when Hamas committed their act of terror, killing 1,400 civilians, they killed 34 Americans. They also captured 22 Americans and took them hostage, that they have tortured and sexually abused those Americans every day, potentially every day, since they were taken on October 7th. And Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, have failed to get those Americans home. And Tim Walz doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of those American hostages, whether they're alive or dead. The Americans that were killed, he didn't mention a single one of them. He didn't care. Because he's more worried about Hamas. That is another thing that pissed me off. He's more worried about Hamas and whether or not they get humanitarian aid, a terrorist organization, than he is about the Americans who are being tortured by that terrorist organization. He's more upset about that humanitarian aid than the Americans those terrorists killed. It's crazy. Wait a minute. The New York Times said that, oh yeah, Vance dominated. Yeah, it's true. It's true. But yeah, so that's another thing. But tomorrow, 7 p.m., we'll be on with the Liberty First Foundation live. We'll talk more about it then. But for now, folks, I'm going to let you go. I thank you, each and every one of you. Whether you listened in for 5 minutes or the whole thing, thank you for getting me through that debate. It was dry. It was dry. It was a little rough, but thank you for being there with me, watching it together. I hope I gave you some insight either before, during, or after. And I thank each and every one of you. I look forward to talking to you again very soon.